Welcome to Crime for Sleep. Before we begin, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Story 1. The Richardson family's Victorian-style home in Hawthorne, Pennsylvania had always made noises. Built in 1897, the three-story structure settled and shifted with the passing seasons, its aged pipes knocking and gurgling through the night. James Richardson, a high school history teacher who had inherited the house from his grandmother, had long ago categorized these sounds as the harmless symphony of an old home. During the long winter of 2018, James noticed his retriever, Cooper, behaving strangely. The normally placid dog would stare at the hallway floor vent, his ears perked forward, a low growl rumbling from his chest. At first, James dismissed it as the dog hearing mice or perhaps the scurrying of a squirrel that had found its way into the crawl space. But by February, Cooper refused to walk down the upstairs hallway altogether, instead waiting at the staircase, whining until James returned. "Something's bothering him," James mentioned to his wife, Diane, one evening as they prepared dinner. She suggested it might be time to call an exterminator, but James, ever frugal, decided to investigate first. The following Saturday morning, while Diane was at her yoga class, James retrieved his toolbox from the garage. The metal was cold to the touch in the unheated space. He selected a screwdriver and returned to the upstairs hallway where Cooper watched anxiously from the staircase landing, unwilling to approach. The floor vent was rectangular, roughly 8 by 15 inches, secured by 4 Phillips head screws that had been painted over many times. As James knelt on the hardwood floor, the house was unnaturally quiet. Even the usual creaking seemed to have paused, as if the structure itself was holding its breath. The screws turned with difficulty, flaking decades of paint as James worked them loose. When the last screw came free, he lifted the metal grate, set it aside, and peered into the darkness below. The beam of his flashlight cut through years of accumulated dust, revealing joists, loose insulation, and electrical conduit. As James shifted his position to get a better angle, the flashlight beam caught something unexpected, a reflection. 2 reflections, to be precise. Eyes, human eyes, wide and alert, staring back at him from the darkness. James fell backward, dropping the flashlight. It clattered against the vent opening and rolled away, its beam now pointed uselessly at the ceiling. Cooper began barking frantically from the staircase. When Detective Elaine Mercer arrived 40 minutes later, she found James sitting on the front porch, shivering despite the wool blanket Diane had wrapped around his shoulders. Inside, 2 patrol officers secured the scene, while a technician from the county crime lab photographed what they had found in the crawl space. "Mr. Richardson," Detective Mercer said, her voice low and measured as she sat beside him on the porch swing. "I understand this must be incredibly disturbing. Can you tell me when you first noticed anything unusual?" James explained about Cooper's behavior, his voice occasionally faltering as he recounted the moment he saw the eyes staring back at him. What the police discovered beneath the Richardson home was more elaborate than anyone could have anticipated. A man had created a living space in the narrow crawl space, carefully constructed to avoid detection. He had built a small platform between the joists, lined with blankets and cushions stolen from neighborhood porches. Empty food containers were neatly stacked in a plastic bin. A small battery-powered lamp sat next to a pile of paperback novels. There was even a plastic bottle that appeared to serve as a makeshift toilet. Most disturbing were the small holes that had been drilled in several ceiling sections of the crawl space holes that corresponded to the floors of the Richardsons' bathroom bedroom, and kitchen. "How long?" Diane asked Detective Mercer, her hands trembling around a mug of tea that had long gone cold. "How long has he been under our floor?" The detective looked at her notes before answering. "Based on the collection of dated receipts we found and the recent newspaper clippings, we believe he's been living there for approximately 7 months. 7 months of watching, listening. 7 months during which the Richardsons had gone about their most private moments, unaware of the eyes below their feet." The man, later identified as Peter Colton, 42, had no fixed address according to official records. Neighbors recognized him as someone who occasionally did odd jobs in the area, raking leaves, shoveling snow, but no one knew where he lived. Now they understood why. When questioned, Colton was surprisingly forthcoming. He spoke in a soft, articulate voice about how he had first entered the home through an unsealed foundation vent during a particularly cold week last July, intending only to sleep there for a night or two. But it was comfortable, he told Detective Mercer during his recorded interview, his hands folded neatly on the metal table of the interrogation room. "And they never noticed. They never heard me move around when they weren't home. After a while, it felt like I was part of the family." The case file, which would later become known among Hawthorne police officers as the man in the crawl space, included dozens of photographs of Colton's living arrangement. The level of careful planning was unsettling. How he had created silent pathways across the joists, how he had positioned his sleeping area away from any heating ducts that might carry sound, how he had collected small, seemingly insignificant items from the Richardsons' home. A single earring, a child's drawing, a Christmas card photo. The Richardsons never returned to the house. They stayed with Diane's parents while realtors handled the sale. The new owners were not told about what had happened. Their disclosure laws in Pennsylvania didn't require it. Sometimes, on quiet nights, the new family hears strange noises, but they attribute them to the settling of their charming old Victorian home. Detective Mercer keeps a single photograph from the case on her desk, not of the crawl space or of Colton, but of Cooper the retriever. The dog knew, she often tells new detectives, when humans rationalize, animals sense. Peter Colton was sentenced to 4 years for breaking and entering, trespassing, and voyeurism. He was released after serving 3 years and 2 months, his whereabouts currently unknown. Sometimes, residents of quiet neighborhoods report unusual sounds beneath their floors, noises they can't quite explain away as pipes or settling foundations. And occasionally, pets refuse to enter certain rooms, their instincts warning them of something their owners cannot perceive. In homes across America, floor vents remain undisturbed, their painted-over screws securing more than just metal grates. Story 2, the evening light filtered through the dusty windows of 317 Maple Street, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. The realtor had called it a diamond in the rough, a century-old Victorian that needed some love. For Daniel and Meredith Carson, it was the perfect project, their first home together, a place to build their future. The previous owner, Eleanor Winters, had lived there for nearly 60 years before passing away. Neighbors described her as a recluse in her final decades, blinds always drawn, mail collected in the dead of night. The house had stood empty for 8 months before the Carsons signed the papers. The dust should have been thick. It should have coated every surface, settled into every corner, but it didn't. "That's strange," Meredith had said on their first night, running a finger along the mantelpiece. "The place looks abandoned, but it's not as dirty as I expected." Daniel had shrugged it off. Maybe the realtor had it cleaned. They began their renovations slowly, methodically, room by room. New paint in the living room, new fixtures in the bathroom. The kitchen would be last a complete overhaul planned for summer. For now, they used it as it was, with its outdated appliances and worn laminate countertops. 3 weeks after moving in, Meredith noticed it first. "Did you clean the kitchen last night?" she asked one morning, coffee cup warm between her palms. Daniel looked up from his newspaper. "No, why?" "The counters, I left them a mess after making dinner. Flour everywhere, but they're spotless now." Daniel frowned. "Maybe you climbed up without thinking about it, or maybe I did it half asleep." But the pattern continued. Things put away, surfaces wiped down, small items rearranged into perfect alignment. Detective Sandra Reeves would later catalog 43 separate instances in her case notes. "I want to try something," Daniel said one night in April after they'd lived in the house for nearly 2 months. "I'm going to leave my coffee mug in the sink, unwashed. Let's see what happens." The blue ceramic mug sat there, coffee dregs congealing at the bottom, when they went to bed at 11:17 p.m. The security system was armed, a recent installation after Meredith thought she'd heard footsteps in the hallway one night. At 6:45 a.m., Daniel padded into the kitchen, eyes still heavy with sleep. The sink was empty. The mug was gone. He felt a chill trace his spine as he slowly opened the cabinet above the dishwasher. There it was, his blue mug, clean, dry, placed precisely in line with the others. "We need to call someone," Meredith whispered when he showed her. "This isn't normal." The police came but found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no unaccounted fingerprints. The security system had registered no breaches. "Sometimes these old houses settle in strange ways," Officer Kendrick had said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Things fall, roll, move. But things don't wash themselves and put themselves away." The Carsons installed cameras, next discreet ones in the kitchen, living room, hallway. For 3 nights, nothing unusual happened. Then on the 4th night at 2:17 a.m., the kitchen camera went dark for exactly 7 minutes. When the feed returned, the dishes that had been left in the sink were gone, cabinets closed, counters gleaming. Detective Reeves took a personal interest in the case after that. Something about the precision of it all bothered her, the methodical nature. She began researching the house's history, going back decades. Alina Winters had purchased the house in 1959, moving in with her husband Thomas. Thomas had died in 1977, leaving Alina alone. The neighbors' statements painted a picture of a woman who had once been sociable, who hosted dinner parties and garden clubs, who had slowly withdrawn after her husband's death. "She became obsessed with cleanliness," said Margaret Lawson, 87, who had lived across the street for 60 years. "Everything had to be just so. She would clean all night sometimes. I'd see her lights on at 3 a.m., shadows moving behind the curtains." The break in the case came when Detective Reeves found Alina's medical records. Diagnosed with severe OCD in her 40s, her condition had worsened after Thomas died. Notes from her therapist described rituals that had to be performed precisely, in order. Cleaning routines that would take hours. A particular way dishes had to be arranged. She believed if she didn't follow these patterns exactly, something terrible would happen to her house, one note read. She feels responsible for keeping everything in its place. Detective Reeves presented her theory to the Carsons 6 weeks after the first incident. "I don't believe in ghosts," she said carefully, hands folded on their dining room table. "But I do believe that patterns can become deeply ingrained in spaces, in the people who inhabit them." 3 days later, while removing the old kitchen cabinets, Daniel found a small door, perfectly concealed in the pantry wall. It opened to reveal a narrow passage that led to a small room beneath the stairs. Inside, a cot, a hot plate, basic supplies, and dozens of notebooks filled with Aliner's handwriting, detailed cleaning schedules, maps of the house, lists of rules. The final page of the last notebook, dated just 2 weeks before Aliner's death, read simply, "The house must be kept clean. I have made arrangements. The house will always be kept clean." The Carsons sold the house 2 months later at a loss. The new owners complained of similar occurrences before they too left. 317 Maple Street stands empty now. Occasionally, neighbors report seeing lights moving inside at night. The dust never seems to settle on the windowsills, and sometimes in the early hours of the morning, they swear they can hear the faint sound of running water, of someone washing dishes that no one has used. The house, it seems, still cleans itself. Story 3, the landlord had warned them. The house had a history, but the rent was too cheap to pass up. At first it was small things, faint murmurs at night, like voices from another room. Then the whispers started coming from inside the walls. They pressed their ears against the plaster, expecting mice, pipes, something logical. Instead, they heard it clearly, "Let me out." It was October 2018 when Marcus and Elaine Donovan moved into the Victorian-style house on Maple Street in the quiet town of Harlow Creek. The residence stood tall among its neighbors, its faded blue paint chipping slightly at the corners, windows that seemed just a bit too narrow. The couple had been searching for months for an affordable place, and at $850 a month, this 3-bedroom seemed like a miracle. Detective Sarah Lawson's shoes made a soft, clicking sound against the hardwood floor as she walked through the empty house 4 months later. A thin layer of dust had settled on the surfaces, catching the weak February sunlight that filtered through the partially drawn curtains. The case file in her hands felt heavier than its actual weight, filled with statements, photographs, and questions without answers. "They just left," the landlord had said, his voice a mixture of confusion and annoyance. "No notice, no forwarding address, all their things still here." He'd called the police after 2 months of no contact and no rent payments. What should have been a simple abandonment case turned into something else entirely when officers entered the basement. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees as Lawson descended the wooden stairs. Each step creaked under her weight, announcing her presence to the empty space below. The basement walls were old brick and mortar, darkened with age and moisture. The police report noted that the original responding officers had found nothing overtly suspicious, just an unfinished space with concrete floors, exposed pipes, and a single metal shelf holding paint cans and gardening tools. But it was what they found behind the shelf that had brought Detective Lawson to the scene. Carefully removing her pen from her pocket, she used it to trace along the mortar lines between the bricks. In several places, the mortar appeared fresher, slightly different in color than the surrounding material. Someone had disturbed this wall, and recently. Back upstairs, Lawson examined the journal they'd found on Elaine Donovan's nightstand. The entries started cheerfully enough, excited plans for decorating, complaints about the creaky floors, a list of nearby restaurants to try. By November, the tone had shifted. "Marcus says I'm imagining things, but I know what I heard last night. It wasn't the pipes or the house settling. It was a voice, and it was coming from inside the wall in the basement. I'm not crazy. I put my hand against the brick and felt vibration like someone tapping from the other side. As Lawson turned the pages, Elaine's handwriting became progressively more unsteady. The final entry, dated January 12th, consisted of just 4 sentences. The whispers are getting louder. Marcus finally heard them too. He's been in the basement for hours now. I think he's going to try to open the wall. The forensic team arrived mid-afternoon. They worked methodically, placing sensors against the wall, taking readings, and marking specific bricks with small pieces of blue tape. The lead technician, a woman with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun, approached Lawson with measured steps. "There's definitely a void behind this section," she said, indicating a roughly 4-foot square area. "And the mortar here is new, maybe 2 or 3 months old at most." The decision to open the wall wasn't made lightly. Permits were obtained, structural engineers consulted. 3 days later, Lawson stood watching as workers carefully removed the marked bricks one by one. The air in the basement felt thick, difficult to breathe. A faint, unpleasant odor began to emerge as more bricks came away. Behind the wall was a small alcove, no more than 3 feet deep and 5 feet wide. The beam of a flashlight illuminated what appeared to be bundles wrapped in plastic sheeting. Lawson's breath caught in her throat as the plastic was partially pulled back, revealing human remains in an advanced state of decomposition. But it wasn't just one body. There were 3 distinct bundles, 3 victims sealed away in the darkness of a house on Maple Street. The oldest remains, according to the medical examiner, had been there for nearly 40 years. A man in his 30s, cause of death determined to be blunt force trauma to the skull. The second victim, a woman in her 20s, had been sealed into the wall approximately 20 years later. The third and most recent victim was identified through dental records as Marcus Donovan. The interesting thing, Dr. Mayer from the medical examiner's office explained, pointing to X-rays displayed on light boards, is that while the first 2 victims show signs of trauma consistent with murder, Mr. Donovan's injuries are different. The damage to his hands suggests he was trying to break through the wall from the inside. The investigation revealed that the house had changed ownership 7 times since its construction in 1887. Property records showed that 2 previous owners had disappeared under mysterious circumstances, their cases still open in dusty file cabinets at the Harlow Creek Police Department. Elaine Donovan was never found. Her car, a blue Honda Civic, was discovered abandoned at a bus station 50 miles away. Surveillance footage showed her boarding a bus headed south, her face pale and drawn, clutching nothing but a small backpack and what appeared to be her journal. The case file remained open on Detective Lawson's desk. She often found herself returning to the house on Maple Street, standing in the empty rooms, listening. The renovations had been completed, the wall in the basement rebuilt with new bricks. The house stood vacant, no one willing to rent despite the significantly lowered price. Sometimes in the quiet moments of her visits, Lawson would place her palm against the cool surface of the basement wall. And sometimes, though she would never admit this in her official reports, she could swear she felt a faint vibration, like fingers tapping from the other side, and the whisper of a voice saying, "Let me out." The house on Maple Street continues to stand, its windows like watching eyes, its walls holding secrets that even now remain partially untold. And sometimes, late at night, neighbors report hearing sounds like distant conversation, though the house remains empty. Empty, that is, except for whatever waits behind the whispering walls. Story 4. The antique store had been closing down for weeks, its treasures slowly disappearing from the wooden shelves that lined the walls. Nestled in the back corner, partially hidden beneath a faded velvet cloth, sat a mahogany trunk with tarnished brass fittings. The shop owner, Mrs. Leyland, a woman whose wrinkled hands had cataloged thousands of antiques over 4 decades, would often pause when customers inquired about it. "That one's not for sale," she would say softly, her fingertips brushing against the worn leather straps that encircled it. "The lock is rusted shut. No one's been able to open it in all the years I've had it." But as the final days of her business approached, practicality overcame superstition. Everything needed to go. When Thomas Mercer entered the shop on that gray October afternoon, the smell of dust and furniture polish hung in the air. The light filtering through the clouded windows cast long shadows across the floor. Thomas wasn't looking for anything in particular, just browsing, killing time before meeting friends for dinner. His attention drifted to the trunk as Mrs. Leyland followed his gaze. "Interested in that old thing?" she asked, her voice carrying a hint of hesitation that Thomas didn't register. "I've had it for 23 years. Came from an estate sale in Millfield." Thomas ran his hand over the top, feeling the cool surface beneath his fingers. Small ridges and imperfections told of its age, of decades or perhaps centuries of history locked inside. "How much?" he asked. $50, Mrs. Leyland replied, "though I should warn you, no locksmith in town has been able to open it. Some say it's better that way." The trunk sat in Thomas's apartment for 3 days before curiosity got the better of him. The detective in him, Thomas, had been a crime reporter for 12 years, couldn't resist the mystery. On Wednesday evening, with rain pattering against his windows, he placed the trunk on his kitchen table and examined it more closely. The lock mechanism appeared simple but stubborn. After trying various keys and tools, he resorted to more aggressive methods. First WD-40, then careful prying with a screwdriver. The metal protested, groaning slightly as he worked. Outside, the streetlights flickered on as evening descended, casting an amber glow through his kitchen window. At 11:42 p.m., after nearly 4 hours of persistence, Thomas felt something give way. The lock surrendered with a dull click that seemed to echo in the stillness of his apartment. For a moment he hesitated, Mrs. Leyland's warning replaying in his mind, but the journalist in him overcame the fleeting apprehension. The hinges creaked in protest as he lifted the lid. The interior was lined with faded burgundy velvet, its once-rich color now dulled by time. Thomas expected to find old clothing, perhaps jewelry or photographs, the usual treasures people locked away. Instead, the trunk was empty save for a single folded sheet of yellowed paper resting at the bottom. With careful fingers, he unfolded it. The paper felt fragile, as if it might disintegrate at any moment. A single sentence had been written in a shaky hand, the ink faded to a rusty brown. "You should have left it closed." Thomas laughed nervously, setting the paper aside. A joke, obviously, some previous owner's idea of humor. But as he went to close the trunk, he noticed something he had overlooked, a faint discoloration on the velvet lining at the bottom. Leaning closer, he realized it formed a perfect outline of a human hand. Detective Sarah Cahill received the call at 6:17 a.m. the following morning. A neighbor had reported unusual noises from Thomas Mercer's apartment during the night. When officers arrived, they found the apartment door unlocked, the rooms undisturbed except for the kitchen. There, an antique trunk sat open on the table. Thomas Mercer was nowhere to be found. "What do we know about him?" Detective Cahill asked as she snapped on latex gloves, the material making a soft sound against her skin. Officer Reynolds flipped through his notes. Freelance journalist, mostly covers crime stories for the Chronicle. Lives alone, no signs of forced entry or struggle. Cahill approached the trunk slowly, something about its presence commanding caution. The room was cold despite the morning sun streaming through the window. Her breath formed small clouds as she exhaled. "Have we tried reaching his phone?" she asked, peering into the trunk without touching it. "Goes straight to voicemail," Reynolds replied. "His car is still in the garage downstairs." Inside the trunk, Cahill spotted the yellowed note. Using a pen, she carefully turned it over to read the cryptic message. Next to it lay Thomas's phone, powered off, and a voice recorder. The detective pressed play. Thomas's voice emerged, clear but hushed. "October 19th, 1:33 a.m. I've been hearing something since I opened the trunk, like breathing but not quite. I'm going to investigate the basement storage room. There's a draft coming from down there, and I swear I heard." The recording ended abruptly. Over the next 3 weeks, Detective Cahill pieced together a disturbing history. The trunk had passed through 7 owners in 23 years. 2 had disappeared without trace. 3 had died under unusual circumstances, apparent suicides that never quite convinced the investigating officers. 1 was institutionalized, still insisting that something had followed him home inside an antique purchase. Mrs. Leyland, when questioned, could only provide limited information. "The trunk came from the Blackwood estate sale," she explained, her hands trembling slightly as she spoke. "Old family, very private. The last Blackwood died alone in that big house. No one found him for days." Cahill's investigation led her to county records, to newspaper clippings yellowed with age. The Blackwood name appeared repeatedly in police reports dating back to 1887, when the family's patriarch, a collector of occult artifacts, had allegedly disappeared while traveling in Eastern Europe. Thomas Mercer's apartment remained empty as autumn deepened. The trunk was taken into evidence, locked away in the basement of the police station. Detective Cahill filed her reports, each one more detailed than the last, but no conclusions could be drawn. The case grew cold as winter approached. On December 3rd, the janitor at the police station reported a strange sound coming from the evidence room. Detective Cahill arrived to find the lock on the door unbroken, but the door standing open. Inside, the trunk sat as it had for weeks, its lid still closed. Beside it was a folded piece of paper that hadn't been there before. With gloved hands, Cahill unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakably Thomas Mercer's, though shakier than his usual precise script. The message was brief. "Some locks are meant to stay closed. Some stories are meant to remain untold." The trunk remains in police custody to this day. Sometimes, late at night when the station is quiet, officers report hearing a soft tapping from inside it, like fingers gently testing the lid from within. Thomas Mercer has never been found. Story 5. The blueprint of the house showed 4 bedrooms. The new owners counted 5. At the end of the upstairs hallway, a door stood slightly ajar, leading to a small, windowless room. The walls were covered in old crayon marks, stick figures drawn with frantic, looping strokes. In the corner sat a single wooden chair, its back turned toward the doorway, and behind it, carved deep into the wall, 3 words repeated over and over: They watch everything. Detective Miranda Ellis smoothed her fingers over the faded blueprint spread across the hood of her sedan. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the driveway of 1478 Oakwood Lane, a modest two-story colonial that had stood vacant for nearly 2 years before the Clarks purchased it last month. The paper crinkled softly beneath her touch, the sound almost imperceptible beneath the distant calls of neighborhood children playing several blocks away. The previous owners never mentioned a fifth bedroom, Sarah Clark said, her voice steady but thin like a taut wire. She wrapped her cardigan tighter around herself despite the mild spring temperature. We thought it was just an oversight. Old houses have quirks. Miranda nodded, her gaze drifting upward to the second-floor windows. The house looked unremarkable from the outside, white siding with navy shutters, a brick walkway lined with young hostas that hadn't yet unfurled their leaves. Nothing about its exterior suggested the disquiet that now hung over the property like a fine mist. "When did you discover the room?" Miranda asked, folding the blueprint with methodical precision. 3 days ago, we've been renovating room by room." James Clark stepped forward, his hand finding his wife's shoulder. "We were measuring the hallway to put in new carpet when we realized the dimensions didn't match what we expected." The interior of the house smelled of fresh paint and wood polish, the promising scent of renewal. As they climbed the stairs, each step creaked beneath their weight, the sound reverberating through the otherwise silent home. The upstairs hallway stretched before them, 4 doors evenly spaced along its length, and then, at the very end, partially hidden by the angle of the wall, the 5th door. Unlike the others, this door was unpainted, its wood darkened with age. No doorknob, just a simple iron latch. It didn't match anything else in the house. "We assumed it was some kind of storage space," Sarah explained, her voice dropping to just above a whisper now. "But then we found those drawings." Miranda pulled on a pair of latex gloves, the soft snap as they settled against her wrists oddly comforting in its familiarity. The latch lifted with surprising ease, as if recently oiled. The door swung inward without a sound. The room was small, perhaps 6 feet square. No windows, no electrical outlets, no light fixtures. The only illumination spilled in from the hallway, casting Miranda's shadow long across the wooden floorboards. The walls had once been white, but were now covered in layers of crayon marks, crude stick figures with oversized heads and staring eyes. Some appeared to be running, others lying down, all drawn with the same frantic energy, the wax sometimes gouging into the plaster. And there in the corner, just as the Clarks had described, sat a wooden chair, child-sized, facing away from the door. "We haven't touched anything," James said from the doorway. Neither he nor Sarah had stepped inside. Miranda circled the perimeter of the tiny room, careful to disturb nothing. Behind the chair, carved into the wall with what must have been painstaking persistence, were the words, "They watch everything," repeated dozens of times in a childish hand, some letters backward, overlapping one another like a desperate incantation. "How long has this house been standing?" Miranda asked, crouching to examine the base of the walls. "Built in 1962, James replied. "We have the original deed." Miranda nodded, her trained eye noticing what others might miss, the slight discoloration of the floorboards near the chair, the subtle difference in the baseboard trim compared to the rest of the house. She pulled a small flashlight from her pocket and shined it along the seams where wall met floor. "This room," she said quietly, "was added after the original construction, probably in the mid-70s, judging by the materials." Back at the station, Miranda spread out old property records across her desk. The soft hum of fluorescent lights and distant ringing of phones created a familiar backdrop as she immersed herself in the history of 1478 Oakwood Lane. Coffee cooled in a mug at her elbow, forgotten as the pieces began to align with gentle, terrible clarity. The house had changed hands 5 times since being built. The Clarks were the 6th owners. Between 1974 and 1978, it had belonged to the Westmore family, Harold, Patricia, and their son, Daniel. Daniel would have been 8 when they moved in, 12 when they left. A search through old newspaper archives revealed nothing unusual about the Westmores. No reported incidents, no criminal records. They had moved to Arizona in the summer of 1978, according to a change of address form. It was in the Child Services records that Miranda found the first ripple of disquiet. 2 wellness checks had been conducted at the residence, initiated by Daniel's school teacher. Both investigations found nothing conclusive. The case notes mentioned that Daniel had become increasingly withdrawn, occasionally drawing disturbing pictures during class. His parents attributed it to an overactive imagination. 3 days later, Miranda stood in the doorway of the 5th bedroom once more. Behind her, a forensics technician carefully photographed every inch of the crayon-covered walls. The childish drawings had been dated to approximately 45 years earlier, consistent with Daniel Westmore's time in the house. "Do we know what happened to him?" asked the technician, adjusting her camera settings. "He died in 2010, car accident in Phoenix," Miranda replied, her eyes fixed on the small wooden chair. "Never married, no children." What the detective didn't share was what she had found in Daniel's psychiatric records from his adult years: the recurring nightmares, the persistent paranoia, the conviction that he was always being observed by unseen watchers. Or the statement from his final therapist, who noted that Daniel insisted there had been a room in his childhood home where they would put him when he misbehaved. A room with no windows where he would sit for hours, sometimes days, facing the corner. The forensics team found no evidence of any crime having been committed in the small room. No blood, no DNA other than what could be attributed to the house's various occupants throughout the years. The case file would eventually be marked resolved, classified as an unfortunate case of child psychological abuse that had long since passed beyond the reach of justice. But as Miranda Ellis drove away from 1478 Oakwood Lane for the final time, watching the house recede in her rearview mirror, she couldn't shake the question that had settled deep in her mind like a stone dropping into still water. Why had none of the subsequent owners mentioned the room? Why had it appeared on no records, no inspections, no renovations for over 4 decades? And why, when she had run her fingers along the carved words on the wall, had the indentations felt as fresh as if they had been carved yesterday? Story 6. The morning fog clung to the ground like a secret reluctant to be revealed, wrapping itself around the trunks of the old oak trees that stood sentinel in Oak Ridge Forest. Detective Sarah Harmon watched her breath materialize in front of her face, then dissipate into the cold autumn air as she made her way down the narrow trail. The leaves beneath her boots produced a soft, rhythmic crunching, nature's metronome counting the steps toward what would become her most perplexing case in 20 years of police work. "Over here," called Marcus, the county medical examiner. His voice was steady, professional, devoid of the usual dark humor that often accompanied their shared work scenes. Something about his tone made Sarah's skin prickle with unease. The body lay partially covered by fallen leaves, as if the forest itself had tried to provide a dignified blanket. Sarah approached with practiced detachment, notebook already in hand, her pen hovering above the blank page. Marcus knelt beside the remains, his latex-covered fingers gently brushing away debris from what was once a human face. Male, approximately 40 to 50 years old, Marcus said, his words coming out in small clouds of condensation. Been here maybe 2 weeks, judging by decomposition patterns. The cold weather has slowed things down considerably. Sarah nodded, writing each detail in her neat, precise handwriting. The soft scratch of pen against paper joined the ambient chorus of distant birds and whispering trees. "Any ID?" she asked, though she already suspected the answer. Marcus shook his head slowly. Nothing in the pockets, but he hesitated, an unusual break in his methodical demeanor. "There's something you should see." He carefully rolled the body to reveal the right shoulder blade. There, even through the deterioration of time and elements, a distinctive scar was visible, a perfect crescent moon shape, about 3 inches long. Sarah felt the air grow heavier around her. "That looks like Thomas Whitaker," Marcus finished for her, "the fisherman who went missing last spring." The weight of those words settled between them like an unwelcome presence. Sarah's fingers tightened around her pen. "That's not possible." They both knew why. Thomas Whitaker had been found 3 months ago in the reservoir on the other side of the county. His body had been identified through dental records, confirmed by his widow, and buried in the cemetery just outside of town. Sarah had attended the funeral herself, had watched the casket lower into the ground while Thomas's wife clutched their son's hands so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "There must be some mistake," Sarah whispered, more to herself than to Marcus. "There's more," Marcus said, his voice dropping even lower. He gently pried open the corpse's mouth, revealing a dental anomaly, a chipped incisor with a distinctive pattern. "This matches Whitaker's dental records precisely. I checked them twice before calling you." The forest seemed to grow quieter, as if listening to their conversation. A light breeze stirred the branches above, sending a shower of golden leaves spiraling down around them. One landed on Sarah's notebook, a delicate maple leaf the color of dried blood. "So who's in Thomas Whitaker's grave?" she asked, the question hanging in the damp air like the lingering fog. Back at the station, the soft hum of fluorescent lights provided a constant background noise as Sarah spread photographs across her desk. The faces of Thomas Whitaker stared back at her, one from his driver's license, another from the morgue after they'd recovered him from the reservoir, and now these new images from the forest. The same man, supposedly found dead twice. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, marking time with a gentle persistence. Sarah rubbed her temples, feeling the beginning of a headache forming behind her eyes. She reached for her coffee, now cold, and took a sip anyway, grimacing at the bitter taste. "Any progress?" Captain Reynolds asked, appearing in her doorway. His voice was low, conscious of the late hour and the few remaining officers working the night shift. "I've requested the exhumation order," Sarah replied, not looking up from the photographs. "Should come through tomorrow morning." Reynolds nodded, his silver hair catching the artificial light. His wife know yet? "No," Sarah finally looked up. "I thought it would be better to wait until we have something concrete. No sense putting her through this twice if there's a reasonable explanation." But they both knew there were few reasonable explanations for finding the same man dead in two different locations, months apart. The following morning brought rain, a soft, persistent drizzle that turned the cemetery ground to mud. Sarah stood under a black umbrella, watching as cemetery workers carefully removed the soil from Thomas Whitaker's grave. The sound of shovels scraping against wet earth seemed unnaturally loud in the otherwise silent graveyard. Mrs. Whitaker had insisted on being present despite Sarah's gentle attempts to dissuade her. She stood now under her own umbrella, her face a mask of confusion and renewed grief. "I don't understand," she said quietly, her eyes never leaving the increasingly exposed casket. "I identified him myself. It was Thomas." Sarah nodded sympathetically. "We just need to verify some information, Mrs. Whitaker. There may have been a procedural error." But Sarah didn't believe that, not really. 20 years of detective work had taught her that sometimes the truth was far stranger than any procedural error could explain. The casket emerged from the earth, mud-streaked but intact. The cemetery director oversaw its careful placement on a tarp spread nearby. A technician from the medical examiner's office stepped forward, tools in hand. The soft click of the casket latches being released seemed to echo across the rain-soaked cemetery. Mrs. Whitaker took a step forward, then stopped, as if afraid of what she might see. Sarah placed a gentle hand on her arm, both in support and to keep her from approaching too closely. The casket lid was raised. There was a moment of complete silence, broken only by the gentle patter of rain on umbrellas. "That's not my husband," Mrs. Whitaker whispered, her voice barely audible. The man in the casket shared Thomas Whitaker's height and build. He had the same graying temples, the same general features that decomposition had rendered just indistinct enough to pass casual inspection. But subtle differences were apparent now that they were looking for them. The hands were wrung smoother, lacking the calluses of a lifetime of fishing. And there, on the right shoulder where a crescent scar should have been, the skin was unblemished. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain. "We'll need to identify him," she said, her training taking over where her understanding failed. Later, in the sterile brightness of the medical examiner's lab, Marcus worked with quiet efficiency. Two bodies now lay on separate tables, the man from the forest and the man from the grave. Same height, same approximate age, similar enough to be mistaken for each other under certain circumstances. "DNA results will take time," Marcus said, his voice echoing slightly in the tiled room. "But preliminary examination suggests the man from the grave has been dead longer than our forest victim." Sarah leaned against the wall, arms crossed. So someone killed this unknown man, made him look like Thomas Whitaker, and planted him to be found. Then, months later, killed the real Thomas and left him in the woods. Marcus shrugged. The evidence suggests as much. But why? Why go through the elaborate charade of a fake death, only to kill the real person later? The question lingered in the cool air of the laboratory, unanswered. That evening, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, case files spread before her, a glass of untouched whiskey at her elbow. The rain continued outside, tapping against her windows with gentle insistence. She had been staring at Thomas Whitaker's financial records for hours, looking for anything unusual. And there it was, a life insurance policy, taken out 6 months before his first death. $2 million paid in full to Mrs. Whitaker 3 weeks after the funeral. The soft ticking of her wall clock seemed to grow louder as a theory began to form in Sarah's mind. She reached for her phone, scrolling through recent calls until she found what she was looking for, the number for Thomas Whitaker's former business partner. "Mr. Jensen," she said when he answered, "I have a few more questions about Thomas Whitaker's fishing business." "Of course, detective," he replied, his voice tinny through the speaker. "Though I'm not sure what else I can tell you, Thomas was a private man." "Was he in financial trouble?" A pause. "Not exactly trouble, but he'd taken out loans for a new boat, significant loans." "And his wife knew about these?" Another pause, longer this time. "No, he was very clear about that," said Elizabeth, worried too much as it was. Sarah thanked him and ended the call, then sat in silence, listening to the rain and the clock, thinking about a desperate man with debts to hide and a wife who'd collected $2 million. 3 days later, Sarah sat across from Elizabeth Whitaker in an interview room at the station. The soft hum of the recording equipment provided the only background noise. "The second body has been officially identified as Thomas Whitaker," Sarah said, her voice calm and professional. "DNA confirmation came through this morning." Elizabeth Whitaker nodded, a single tear tracking down her cheek. "So someone murdered an innocent man just to what? Pretend it was Thomas?" "That's what we're trying to understand," Sarah replied, watching the woman's face carefully. "The strange thing is, the first body, the one you identified as your husband, he's still unidentified. No matches in any database." Elizabeth dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. "I don't understand any of this." "I think you do," Sarah said quietly. She opened a folder and slid a document across the table. "This is a bank statement showing a withdrawal of $50,000 from your joint account 3 days before the first body was discovered." Elizabeth stared at the paper, her expression unchanging. "We also found a connection between you and a man named Robert Carver. He works at the county morgue, has access to dental records, and phone records show you called him 17 times in the weeks before your husband's first death." The clock on the wall continued its steady ticking, counting the seconds of silence that stretched between them. "Thomas was going to lose everything," Elizabeth finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The boats, the house, our savings, all of it. He'd made bad investments, taken out loans he couldn't repay." "So you came up with a plan," Sarah prompted. "Fake his death, collect the insurance, pay off the debts." Elizabeth nodded slowly. It was supposed to be simple. Robert found someone who matched Thomas physically, a John Doe from the morgue. We altered the dental records just enough Thomas would disappear. We'd collect the money, and in a year or so, he'd join me somewhere else. "What went wrong?" Elizabeth's eyes, now dry, met Sarah's directly. "Thomas got greedy. Once he was dead, he decided he wanted more than just financial freedom. He called me, said he'd met someone else while hiding out, said he wanted half the insurance money, and then he'd disappear for good." Sarah felt a heaviness settle in her chest. "So you found him?" "In that cabin in the woods where he was hiding, yes." Elizabeth's voice had taken on a detached quality. "He didn't even seem surprised to see me, just held out his hand and asked for the money." Outside the interview room, rain continued to fall on the small town of Oak Ridge. The forest kept its secrets, the graves stayed sealed, and Detective Sarah Harmon added another closed case to her files, a case of a man who died twice, betrayed by the same heart that had once loved him. Story 7. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the dusty windows of the Victorian house on Oakwood Drive. For nearly 30 years, the building had stood empty, a silent observer to the changing neighborhood around it. The demolition crew arrived just as the autumn light began to soften, their voices echoing through empty rooms that had once held the whispers of family dinners and children's laughter. Jacob Miller, the foreman, moved with careful steps across the creaking floorboards. His clipboard contained the inventory checklist, a final documentation before the walls would come down. The basement door groaned on rusted hinges as he pushed it open, revealing wooden stairs that descended into darkness. The smell rose to meet him, damp earth, old paper, and something else, something metallic and strange. "We've got power down here," called out Elijah, the youngest member of the crew, his voice trailing up from below. A single bulb flickered to life, bathing the basement in a weak amber glow that pulsed gently, as if the electricity itself was struggling to breathe. The space was cluttered with the abandoned possessions of previous lives, cardboard boxes softened by humidity, a child's rocking horse with one runner missing, stacks of yellowed newspapers from the early 1990s. The demolition team moved methodically through the space, cataloging items of potential value before they would be discarded. It was Lewis who first noticed the mirror. Unlike everything else in the basement, it bore no layer of dust, its full-length surface gleaming in the unstable light. The ornate wooden frame, carved with intricate vines and small, faceless figures, seemed to absorb the amber glow rather than reflect it. "Hey, this might be worth something," Lewis called out, his voice unusually soft, as if hesitant to disturb the air around the mirror. Jacob made a note on his clipboard, the scratch of his pencil audible in the sudden quiet that had fallen over the crew. Lewis ran his hand along the frame, then reached for his bandana to wipe the glass, though it seemed unnecessary given how clean it already was. As the cloth touched the surface, he leaned forward, expecting to see his own reflection in the glass. Instead, the mirror revealed the room behind him, the same basement, with the same boxes and broken furniture, but standing between two stacks of newspapers was a woman Lewis had never seen before. Her hair was pulled back tightly, her dress old-fashioned, her expression blank as she stared directly at him through the glass. Lewis turned quickly, the bandana falling from his fingers, but the space behind him was empty. When he looked back at the mirror, he saw only his own startled face. "You okay?" Jacob asked, noticing his colleague's sudden pallor. "Yeah, just thought I saw something," Lewis mumbled, bending to retrieve his bandana from the concrete floor. Detective Sarah Chen arrived at the property 3 days later. The demolition had been halted after Jacob Miller discovered a sealed room behind the basement's north wall, a room containing a single wooden chair facing a blank wall, and hundreds of Polaroid photographs carefully arranged in concentric circles on the floor. The crime scene technicians worked in silence, cataloging each photograph. They all showed the same thing, the mirror, and in it, reflections of people who did not appear to be taking the picture. The house belonged to the Wainwright family until 1994, Officer Daniels explained, handing Chen a thin file. Thomas Wainwright was a photographer, wife Margaret, 2 teenage daughters. They moved away suddenly. Neighbors say it was in the middle of the night, no forwarding address. Chen nodded, her fingers leaving slight impressions in the dust on the file cover. The basement air felt heavy around her, as if reluctant to fill her lungs completely. And the mirror. Still here, we didn't move it yet. The mirror stood exactly where Lewis had found it, leaning slightly against the wall. Chen approached it carefully, noting how the room's dim light seemed to bend around its edges rather than illuminate its surface. Her reflection looked back at her, but something about the eyes seemed wrong, as if they moved a fraction of a second after she did. The investigation proceeded slowly over the following weeks. The photographs were dated, spanning from 1987 to 1994. Each one captured a different person reflected in the mirror, men and women of various ages, all with the same hollow expression. None of them matched missing persons reports from the area during that period. Thomas Wainwright proved difficult to locate. Property records showed that after leaving Oakwood Drive, the family had moved between rental properties across 3 states before disappearing from public records entirely around 2000. Then came the discovery that shifted the investigation's direction entirely. A technician enhancing one of the Polaroids noticed something in the bottom corner of the mirror's reflection. Thomas Wainwright himself, camera in hand, taking the photograph. But in the space where he should have been standing to capture the image, there was nobody at all. Each photograph was re-examined. In every image, somewhere in the reflection, Wainwright could be seen, sometimes partially obscured, sometimes clearly visible, but always present in the reflection while physically absent from the space that should have contained him. Detective Chen spent hours in the basement, studying the mirror without touching it. The glass remained impossibly clean despite the continuing work around it. Sometimes, when the overhead light flickered in just the right way, she thought she could see movement in its depths, like watching a scene unfold through clouded water. Margaret Wainwright was finally located in a small coastal town in Oregon, living under her maiden name. The interview took place in a quiet coffee shop overlooking the gray Pacific. He found it at an estate sale, she explained, her voice steady but her fingers constantly rearranging the sugar packets on the table. An old man had died and his children were selling everything. Thomas was drawn to it immediately, said it had perfect visual fidelity. He used those exact words. She described how her husband became obsessed with the mirror, spending hours in the basement taking photographs. How he began to change, becoming distant, speaking of the others he could see in the reflection. The day we left, he told me he had discovered how to step through, Margaret said, her eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the window. I took the girls to my sister's that night. When I came back the next morning to convince him to get help, he was gone. All his clothes were still there, his wallet, his keys just gone. The Wainwright case remains officially unsolved. The mirror was taken to a police evidence warehouse, sealed in a wooden crate marked only with a case number. The demolition of the house on Oakwood Drive was completed the following spring, and a new family built a modern home on the property. Detective Chen requested transfer to another precinct 6 months later. Her colleagues noticed she had developed an aversion to mirrors, always averting her eyes when passing reflective surfaces. In her final report, she included a personal note that was subsequently removed from the official file. Some doors are meant to remain closed, some reflections are not our own, and some investigations lead to places from which we cannot return unchanged. The basement mirror sits in evidence storage to this day. Occasionally, late shift officers report hearing faint tapping sounds coming from its sealed crate, like fingernails gently testing the wood from the inside. Story 8, it was hidden in the lining of an old suitcase, the paper yellowed and fragile. The handwriting was rushed, desperate. If you're reading this, it means they found me. The letter ended abruptly, the last word trailing off mid-sentence. The signature at the bottom was barely legible, but when they looked up the name, they realized no missing persons report, no records at all. This person had never officially existed. Detective Laura Mercer ran her fingers along the edge of the brittle paper, careful not to cause further damage. The evidence room was quiet at this hour, just after midnight, with only the soft hum of the ventilation system and the occasional distant footsteps from the night shift patrol officers. A single lamp cast a warm glow over her workstation, creating more shadows than light in the dusty room. The suitcase had been discovered in the attic of the old Whitaker house on Maple Street, a property that had remained vacant for nearly 17 years before a young couple purchased it for renovation. They had found it tucked beneath the floorboards, covered in a fine layer of dust that had accumulated undisturbed for what appeared to be decades. Laura slipped on a pair of cotton gloves, the fabric whispering against her skin. She carefully placed the letter in an evidence bag, then turned her attention to the suitcase itself. It was a vintage piece, probably from the late 1960s, with faded brown leather and brass fixtures that had lost their shine long ago. The initials JD were embossed on a small tag, nearly worn away by time. JD, she murmured to herself, letting the initials linger in the still air of the room. The signature on the letter seemed to match James Donovan, a name that, according to every database search, belonged to no one. The detective's notebook lay open beside her, the pages filled with her neat, methodical handwriting. She had already documented every detail of the suitcase's contents: 3 shirts, neatly folded but yellowed with age, a pair of men's slacks, a small leather-bound book with blank pages, a fountain pen long dried up, and a faded photograph of a young woman standing before a lake, her face partially turned away from the camera. Laura lifted the photograph again, studying it under the lamplight. There was something eerily familiar about the scene, though she couldn't place it. The woman's hair was styled in the fashion of the early 1970s, her dress simple yet elegant. On the back, written in the same handwriting as the letter, were the words, Sarah, Silver Lake, Summer 72. Silver Lake, the name tugged at Laura's memory. It was about 40 miles north of town, a once popular vacation spot that had fallen into neglect after the drowning accidents in the mid-70s. 3 people had lost their lives there within a 2-year span, leading to the lake's closure as a recreational area. The detective reached for her coffee, now lukewarm, and took a slow sip. The liquid was bitter on her tongue, but she welcomed its familiar taste as she connected the threads in her mind. A quick search in the county's digital archives confirmed her suspicion. One of the drowning victims had been a woman named Sarah Calloway, aged 23, in August of 1972. The quiet of the evidence room seemed to deepen as Laura pulled up the old case file. The photographs of the scene were grainy, the black and white images showing the lake's edge where Sarah's body had been found. The cause of death had been ruled accidental drowning, though the report noted that the victim had been an experienced swimmer. Laura's eyes moved slowly across the screen, absorbing every detail. Sarah had been staying at a cabin by the lake with a friend who reported her missing when she didn't return from an evening swim. The friend's name wasn't James Donovan, it was Peter Whitaker. The detective's breath caught slightly. Whitaker, the same name as the house where the suitcase had been found. The connection was too significant to be coincidental. Laura checked the time, 1:37 a.m. Too late to make calls, but not too late to continue piecing together this puzzle that had somehow fallen into her lap. She returned to the letter, reading it once more under the soft lamplight. If you're reading this, it means they found me. Not if something happens to me or if I'm missing, but if they found me. James Donovan hadn't been afraid of getting lost. He had been hiding. The detective carefully closed the evidence bag and returned it to the secure cabinet. As she drove home through the quiet streets of the sleeping town, her mind continued to work through the possibilities. The suitcase hidden for decades, a man with no records, a woman who drowned, a house that connected them both. The next morning, Laura stood on the shore of Silver Lake, the water still and reflective under the overcast sky. The area had been partially reclaimed by nature, with overgrown paths and dilapidated picnic tables scattered among the trees. The old cabins had either collapsed or been torn down years ago, leaving only concrete foundations as evidence they had ever existed. She found the location where Sarah's body had been discovered, marked in the old police photographs by a distinctive curved tree that still stood at the water's edge, now larger but unmistakable. The detective stood there for a long moment, letting the gentle lapping of the water against the shore fill her ears. When Laura returned to the station, she requested the property records for the Whitaker house. The home had indeed belonged to Peter Whitaker from 1969 until his death in 2006, after which it had remained in probate for years before finally being sold. Peter had never married, had no children, and according to his death certificate, had died of natural causes at the age of 76. 3 days later, Laura found herself interviewing Margaret Holloway, an 83-year-old former neighbor of Peter Whitaker. They sat in Margaret's sunlit kitchen, the scent of freshly baked cookies filling the warm air. "Oh yes, I remember Peter well," Margaret said, her voice soft but clear. "A quiet man, always polite but kept to himself, especially after what happened with that poor girl at the lake." "Did you ever hear him mention someone named James Donovan?" Laura asked. Margaret's fingers paused on her teacup, a fleeting shadow crossing her face. "James, now that's a name I haven't heard in many years. He was Peter's friend, stayed with him for a while in the early 70s. Then one day, he was just gone." "Gone?" "Yes, right around the time of that tragic accident at the lake. Peter never spoke of him again. I always assumed they'd had a falling out." As Laura drove back to the station, the pieces began to align in her mind like stars forming a constellation. The letter, the suitcase, the drowning that perhaps wasn't an accident, a man who disappeared and another who lived alone for the rest of his life. The investigation continued for weeks, a slow, methodical process of archive searches and interviews with anyone still alive who might remember. Old newspaper articles revealed a small detail. Sarah Calloway had been engaged, though her fiancé's name wasn't mentioned. A search of property tax records showed that Peter Whitaker had made a significant payment the month after Sarah's death, nearly depleting his savings account. The case would never see a courtroom. Peter Whitaker was long dead, and James Donovan, if that was even his real name, had vanished decades ago, possibly never to be found. But as Laura carefully documented her findings, she couldn't help but construct the narrative that seemed most likely. 2 men, 1 woman, a triangle that ended in tragedy at the edge of a lake, 1 man who paid for his silence with a lifetime of solitude. Another who disappeared, leaving behind only an unfinished letter, perhaps written in a moment when he thought his secret might be discovered, but never needed when the discovery didn't come. The truth remained elusive, a shadow just beyond clear sight. The case file was eventually closed, marked historical investigation inconclusive, and placed in the archives alongside countless other mysteries that time had rendered impossible to fully solve. But sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, Detective Laura Mercer would think about that letter, its last word trailing off into nothingness, like a life cut short or a story without its proper ending. The signature of a man who had ceased to exist, hidden in the lining of a suitcase that had waited patiently for decades to tell its tale. Story 9, the emergency operator barely noticed the incoming call at first, just static, the usual pocket dial, but then a whisper so soft it barely registered. "Help me." The call traced back to an abandoned house on the edge of town. Officers responded, expecting a prank. Instead, they found a cell phone on the floor, its battery long dead. The call should have been impossible. Detective Sarah Mercer arrived at the scene an hour after midnight. Rain fell in a gentle, persistent rhythm against the weathered shingles of the Victorian-era home. The structure itself seemed to breathe with the night wind, wooden joints creaking in a slow, mournful cadence. Sarah's boots left impressions in the thin layer of dust that coated the floorboards as she made her way through the foyer, following the beam of her flashlight. "Phone's in here," Officer Jenkins called from what once had been a living room. His voice echoed slightly in the empty space. The walls, stripped of furniture and decoration, amplified every sound: the drip of water from a leaking ceiling, the occasional scurry of something small in the walls, the measured breathing of the officers as they worked. The cell phone lay in the center of the room, positioned with an unnatural precision, as though carefully placed rather than dropped. An older model, scratched from years of use, its screen cracked in one corner. Sarah knelt beside it, not touching, simply observing. The layer of dust surrounding it remained undisturbed. No footprints, no signs of recent movement. "Batteries completely drained," Jenkins said, his voice lowered instinctively in response to the stillness of the house. "Tech team says it's been dead for at least a week. They're pulling records now." Sarah nodded, the movement almost imperceptible in the dim light, and the call came in at 11:42 p.m. She made a note in her small leather-bound notebook, the scratch of her pen against paper another subtle layer in the house's soundscape. "Yes, ma'am," Clara at dispatch says she heard breathing, then that whisper. Female voice, she thinks, young maybe. Then nothing but static before the line went dead. Sarah stood slowly, her knees protesting slightly. At 43, she'd spent 20 years with the department, the last 12 as a detective. She'd seen strange things, unexplainable things, but never a call from a phone that couldn't possibly make one. She directed her flashlight beam around the room, watching as particles of dust danced in its path. "This house has been abandoned for how long?" Jenkins consulted his notes. Property records show it's been vacant for 3 years, owned by a trust now. The Miller family were the last residents. The name triggered something in Sarah's memory. "Miller," she repeated softly. "Rebecca Miller." "Yes, that's right. Mother and daughter lived here until the mother died. Cancer, I think. Daughter would have been about 17 then. She went into foster care briefly, then disappeared from the system when she turned 18. The beam of Sarah's flashlight paused on a dark stain in one corner of the room, almost invisible against the aged hardwood. She approached it slowly, crouching down to examine the discoloration. Not recent, years old, absorbed deep into the grain of the wood. "We need luminol in here," she said, her voice calm but carrying an underlying tension. "And I want the case files on Rebecca Miller, everything we have." 3 days later, Sarah sat in the department's archive room, surrounded by boxes of files and evidence. The air felt heavy with dust and secrets, the fluorescent lighting casting everything in a clinical, unforgiving glow. She'd been there since dawn, piecing together fragments of a story that had begun to haunt her waking thoughts. Rebecca Miller, 16 at the time of her mother's death. Official cause, pancreatic cancer, advanced stage. Nothing suspicious noted in the medical reports. Rebecca had been placed with a foster family across town, attended school sporadically for a year, then vanished after her 18th birthday. No missing persons report filed, no further official record of her existence. But Sarah had found something else. A report filed 6 months before her mother's death. A neighbor had called, reporting sounds of arguments, a girl crying. Officers had responded, found nothing conclusive. The case had been closed, marked as a false alarm. The luminol tests had revealed what Sarah had suspected: blood, not just in the corner where she'd noticed the stain, but in patterns across the floor, the walls, even traces on the ceiling. Someone had cleaned methodically, thoroughly, but science had ways of revealing what human eyes couldn't see. Detective, a young officer, stood at the doorway, holding a manila folder. "The phone records you requested." Sarah accepted the folder, nodded her thanks. Inside were printouts of call histories, account information. The phone had belonged to Ellen Miller, Rebecca's mother. The account had been deactivated shortly after her death. The phone should have been disconnected, incapable of placing calls. Yet it had called 911 on the 3rd anniversary of Ellen Miller's death. The investigation led Sarah to a small apartment building in a neighboring county. Rebecca Miller, now using her grandmother's maiden name, lived alone, worked nights at a local hospital as an orderly, kept to herself, neighbors said, quiet, never caused trouble. Sarah stood outside the apartment door, her partner, Detective Rodriguez, positioned slightly behind her. The hallway smelled of old carpet and cooking spices, a tapestry of lives being lived in close proximity. She knocked, 3 measured raps against the thin wood. The woman who opened the door had pale eyes that seemed too old for her young face. Recognition flickered across those eyes when Sarah identified herself, but no surprise. Only a quiet resignation, as though she had been waiting for this moment. "It's about the house, isn't it?" Rebecca's voice was soft, slightly raspy. "About my mother." Inside the apartment, Rebecca sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap. No nervous fidgeting, no defensive posture, just stillness. She spoke methodically, each word carefully chosen. She was in pain for months before the diagnosis. The doctors gave her something, but it wasn't enough, never enough. Rebecca's gaze remained fixed on a point somewhere beyond Sarah. That night, she asked me to help her end it, begged me. I couldn't watch her suffer anymore. Sarah kept her expression neutral, her voice gentle. "You helped her die." "I held the pillow," Rebecca said, the words falling into the space between them like stones into still water. She stopped fighting after a few seconds, like she was grateful. "And then you cleaned everything up," Sarah prompted. "You made it look like natural causes." Rebecca nodded slowly. The doctor never questioned it. She was terminal anyway. I buried the pillow in the backyard, scrubbed everything. I was so careful. Why call 911 now, after all this time? Rebecca's eyes finally met Sarah's, confusion evident in them. I haven't been back to that house since I left. The phone was my mother's. I threw it in a drawer after she died. I don't even know where it is now. The investigation continued for weeks. Forensics confirmed Rebecca's story. Traces of DNA on a pillow recovered from the property matched Ellen Miller. The medical examiner reviewed the case and determined that the cancer had been real, advanced, terminal. Ellen Miller would have died within weeks, possibly days. The district attorney, after lengthy consideration, declined to press charges. Compassionate release, they called it unofficially. The case file was marked closed. But the phone call remained unexplained. Technical experts examined the device repeatedly, concluding that it could not have functioned in its condition. The 911 operator stood by her account, a whisper, a plea for help, then static. On her last day working the case, Sarah visited the house one final time. Standing in the empty room where the phone had been found, she felt the weight of unresolved questions. Had Rebecca called despite her denials? Was there an accomplice they'd never discovered? Or was there something else, something beyond rational explanation? The house offered no answers, only the soft settling of old wood and the whisper of wind through cracks in the windows. Some cases, Sarah knew, never truly closed. They simply faded like voices on a disconnected line, leaving behind nothing but static and doubt. As Sarah locked the house behind her, the setting sun cast long shadows across the porch. For a moment, she thought she heard something, the faintest sound, like someone trying to speak from very far away. Then nothing but the evening breeze, carrying away words that might never have been spoken at all. Story 10, she entered through the front door, stirring up dust in the stagnant air. The once abandoned house stood frozen in time, its peeling walls and draped furniture telling tales of neglect. But amidst this eerie stillness, there was a peculiar mystery that captivated her attention: the doors. No matter which path she took, each door led her back to the same parlor, trapping her in a bewildering loop. The only escape seemed to be retracing her steps, yet when she turned, the front door had vanished into thin air. The unearthing of Morgan Pierce's lifeless body shifted the focus of the decaying Victorian house from mere curiosity to a chilling crime scene. Detective Sarah Lynn stood at the threshold, observing as forensic experts drifted through the dim interior like phantoms. The house had garnered a reputation among locals for its strange phenomena: compasses spinning wildly, a pervasive sensation of being watched. Now, hidden beneath the surface, lay secrets far more sinister than mere folklore. The initial assessment indicates she passed approximately 3 days ago, the medical examiner murmured, his words barely audible. The cause of death appears to be asphyxiation. Morgan was discovered seated in an antique chair in the parlor, her posture serene as if awaiting a visitor, hands folded delicately in her lap. No signs of struggle, no marks of resistance. The scene exuded a haunting tranquility that unsettled even the most seasoned investigators. "Who discovered the body?" Lind inquired, scanning her notes. "A real estate agent showing the property to potential buyers," her partner replied. They stumbled upon her seated there, initially mistaking her for a trespasser until they drew closer. Since the passing of the previous owner, Eleanor Blackwood, the house had remained deserted for nearly 5 years, mired in legal disputes and forgotten by most, save for vandals and thrill-seekers. Morgan Pierce, a 26-year-old graduate student engrossed in researching architectural anomalies for her thesis, had a fascination with spaces that defied conventional norms. Described by friends as meticulous and driven, the enigmatic Victorian house, with its reputation for disorienting visitors, had undoubtedly beckoned to her curious spirit. Her roommate reported her missing 2 days prior, Lind noted. Morgan had mentioned visiting the house where people get lost for her studies. As the investigation unfolded, it unveiled Morgan's repeated visits to the house in the weeks leading up to her demise. Entries in her journal recounted peculiar acoustic phenomena, sudden drops in temperature, and doors seemingly leading to different chambers each time they were opened. In her final journal entry, she spoke of intending to document what she referred to as spatial anomalies, yet her specialized equipment was nowhere to be found. During the autopsy, an unexpected revelation surfaced. Traces of a rare alkaloid linked to shamanic rituals were detected in Morgan's system. While the substance could induce disorientation and vivid illusions, the levels present were insufficient to be fatal. She wasn't one to partake in recreational substances, her partner affirmed during interrogation. Morgan was meticulous in her methodology. She wouldn't have jeopardized her perception willingly. Through digital forensics, remnants of erased messages on Morgan's phone were salvaged. Dialogues with an individual sharing her intrigue with the house, someone who professed comprehension of its enigmas. The exchanges grew increasingly intimate and enigmatic. The house retains memories of its past, a message disclosed. It yearns for acknowledgement. The trail led investigators to Adam Reeves, an architectural historian who had engaged in correspondence with Morgan. His expertise in rare spatial phenomena had captivated her interest, transcending professional boundaries into a more personal connection. When questioned, Reeves expressed genuine grief over her passing. The house carries a legacy, he elucidated. The original designer embedded optical illusions and false perspectives within its structure. It was intended to confound and disorient. Morgan believed there was a deeper truth hidden within beyond mere tricks of architecture. However, Reeves possessed a solid alibi for the presumed time of Morgan's demise. Surveillance footage depicted him delivering a lecture at a university event hours away. A breakthrough emerged from an unexpected source: Eleanor Blackwood's grandson, now residing abroad. Upon being contacted by investigators, he unveiled a long-guarded family secret. "My grandmother wasn't the sole Blackwood to perish within those walls," he divulged. "Others met their end there, always discovered in the parlor, always in a state of tranquility." The family referred to it as the claiming. Providing historical journals spanning generations, he detailed deaths initially attributed to natural causes like heart failure or strokes. A recurring pattern emerged: individuals spending prolonged periods within the house eventually succumbed to what the family cryptically termed the influence. A secondary sweep of the premises unveiled a concealed compartment behind the parlor's hearth. Inside, investigators stumbled upon Morgan's missing equipment alongside an intriguing discovery. An alcove housed artifacts from diverse indigenous cultures, meticulously arranged in a geometric formation. At the center rested a weathered figurine, embodying a deity linked to liminal spaces, transitional thresholds between realms. Traces of the alkaloid found in Morgan's system were detected on the artifacts. The case took a sinister turn when the analysis of dust patterns within the house hinted at an additional presence during Morgan's demise. Partial fingerprints alien to Morgan or any recognized visitors were retrieved from doorknobs across the residence. 3 weeks into the inquiry, Adam Reeves was discovered deceased in his residence. Mirroring Morgan's unsettling posture, he sat facing the entryway, bearing the same alkaloid in his system. Clutched in his grip was a key, incompatible with any locks in his abode, but seamlessly fitting the concealed compartment within the Victorian house. In his final correspondence, sent to himself as if preserving a testament, Reeves inscribed, "The house doesn't ensnare you physically, it ensnares your perception." Morgan was correct, the doors lead to their designated destinations, yet something distorts your comprehension, making you believe you're traversing in circles. Once enlightenment dawns, departure is feasible at any moment. However, by then, departure is inconceivable. The case remains officially unresolved, catalogued as suspicious fatalities warranting further investigation. The Victorian edifice has since been condemned, its access restricted by authorities. Nonetheless, whispers linger of phantom lights glimpsed within its confines on certain nights, and of guests who venture inside but never re-emerge. Some locals assert that the house claims those who delve too deeply into its enigmas. Others posit that Morgan and Reeves unearthed a potent and ancient force residing within the interstices of conventional reality. The veracity remains as elusive as an exit in a dwelling where every doorway leads back to the commencement. Story 11. The aged apartment possessed its idiosyncrasies, pipes that groaned, floorboards that whispered secrets. Yet the new tenant discerned a difference in the sounds she heard. The footsteps were too deliberate, too measured. They echoed from above, slow and steady. Curiously, she dwelled on the topmost floor. One night, emboldened by a spark of courage, she tapped the ceiling with a broomstick. The sound ceased. A heavy silence settled in. Then a solitary knock reverberated from within the ceiling. Sarah Coleman chose to keep the mysterious knocking to herself. She convinced her mind it was merely the old building settling, or perhaps a small creature finding solace in the attic space. Despite the nightly footsteps persisting, she adapted, raising the volume of her television, donning headphones at bedtime, anything to drown out the rhythmic footfalls that traversed her ceiling in the shadows. Detective Morris stumbled upon the apartment's peculiar tale when a maintenance worker stumbled upon a concealed crawlspace during routine repairs. The worker had uncovered a narrow passage behind a section of drywall in the hallway adjacent to Sarah's unit, intended for fixing a water leak. Peering inside with a flashlight, he discovered an unanticipated living space: scattered food wrappers, discarded water bottles, a soiled blanket, and a small notebook. The building superintendent promptly contacted the authorities. Detective Morris, alongside his partner Detective Rivera, arrived to find the maintenance worker pallid and trembling. "Someone's been dwelling in the walls," he kept repeating. "Someone's been watching." The notebook divulged meticulous observations of Sarah Coleman, her routines, her visitors, her meals, her entertainment choices, her bathing times, her slumber. The handwriting, once neat, spiraled into chaos on the final pages, with strange symbols adorning the margins. "The subject no longer responds to my signals," the last entry read. "She has chosen to ignore me. No one ignores me." Forensic teams combed the crawlspace, uncovering fingerprints unmatched in any database. They revealed a labyrinth of passages integrated into the building's walls and ceilings, some dating back decades according to structural assessment. The passages linked to 5 different apartments, culminating in observation points disguised as fixtures or minor damages solely within Sarah Coleman's abode. Residents currently occupying the building professed no abnormal occurrences beyond typical apartment noises. Former tenants, however, recounted unsettling tales. 3 prior inhabitants of Sarah's unit expressed feeling watched or hearing inexplicable movements. One resident fled after a mere fortnight. None had voiced their experiences, fearing they would appear paranoid. The breakthrough in the investigation arose when forensics detected microscopic blood spatter in one of the crawl spaces. DNA analysis traced it to Martin Weaver, a former tenant who vanished mysteriously 4 years prior. His disappearance had been reported by his family, but the case had grown cold. Martin had resided directly below Sarah's apartment. Detective Morris revisited Martin's disappearance. According to neighbors, Martin had lamented about noises emanating from above. He had confronted the tenant residing upstairs at the time, an introverted man named Edward. Shortly thereafter, Martin vanished, and Edward vacated the premises without leaving a forwarding address. Delving into Edward's rental history unveiled a pattern. He had inhabited top-floor units in 6 distinct apartment complexes over 2 decades, forging few social connections before disappearing abruptly. A neighbor from his 3rd residence recalled him as intense, expressing Edward's frequent grievances about the necessity of silence. Property records disclosed Edward's acquisition of remote rural land. Investigating the site, they unearthed a cabin adorned with photographs and notes. Images of residents from various apartment buildings, including Sarah Coleman and Martin Weaver, lined the walls. Maps detailing ventilation systems and structural vulnerabilities. Elaborate journals chronicling observations of the specimens and maintaining the habitat. At the cabin's core stood a corkboard plastered with newspaper clippings of missing persons reports, 6 in total. All were former residents of buildings where Edward had resided. Beneath the board, deep gouges marred the wooden floor, hinting at something heavy dragged repeatedly. Behind the cabin, cadaver dogs led investigators to freshly disturbed earth. Excavation unveiled human remains, and then another grave, and another. As forensic anthropologists endeavored to identify the victims, Detective Morris returned to Sarah's apartment building. Though the crawl spaces had been sealed, residents sporadically reported peculiar noises. During the installation of new security systems, maintenance workers stumbled upon a small notebook tucked into a corner where the ceiling met the hallway wall. The writing within, akin to the previous notebook, contained a chilling message. They found my old nest, but not my new one. The notebook's final page depicted a rough sketch of Sarah's apartment layout, highlighting a new passage in crimson, and a date for that very night. Officers hastened to evacuate Sarah, only to discover her unit deserted. Her phone rested on the kitchen counter. The television emitted a faint glow. The shower ran silently. In the bathroom, as the steam dissipated, a message materialized on the mirror, etched by a finger, "Look up." The ceiling panel above the shower had been removed. The manhunt for Edward, now identified as Edward Mercer, a former construction worker skilled in renovations, was underway. His intricate knowledge of building structures facilitated the creation of hidden observation points and passages. Thermal scans of Sarah's building revealed no signs of current habitation within the walls. Sarah Coleman remained missing, her case entwined with similar vanishings across multiple states. Authorities cautioned apartment managers about unauthorized alterations and concealed spaces. What haunts Detective Morris most is not the graves, the journals, or the photographs of unsuspecting residents. It's the image of Sarah, night after night, hearing those footsteps above her in an apartment devoid of an upper floor. The footsteps that ceased when she rapped, and then rapped back. Sometimes, in the solitude of his own home, Detective Morris finds himself gazing up at his ceiling, attuned to every sound, waiting and pondering who else might be listening too. Story 12. In the heart of the city, there stood a budget hotel, its facade worn and weathered, a haven for transient souls seeking respite for a single night. The weary clerk behind the reception desk handed her a key, his eyes betraying a cryptic message as he whispered, "Avoid the last door on the left." Intrigued, her curiosity piqued. She couldn't resist the pull of the forbidden. That night, shrouded in a dimly lit corridor, she found herself standing before that ominous door. The metal handle sent shivers down her spine, its icy touch a stark contrast to the oppressive warmth of the hallway. To the naked eye, the door appeared no different from its neighbors, blending seamlessly into the nondescript surroundings until she pressed her ear against it. A soft, rhythmic breathing emanated from the other side, a whisper of unseen presence. Detective Morgan Reed awoke from her slumber, her mind still clouded with dreams, as she crossed the threshold marked by yellow crime scene tape. The air was heavy with the metallic tang of blood, a scent that stirred memories of past investigations. The room bore witness to a macabre scene, a pristine bathroom, an untouched bed, and in between the lifeless form of a young woman, her golden locks splayed like a halo around her. Her vacant gaze fixed upon the ceiling, frozen in a silent scream. Reed knelt beside the victim, her movements careful and deliberate, mindful of preserving the delicate dance of evidence markers that dotted the room. The forensic technician, his demeanor detached and clinical, captured the tragedy through the lens of his camera, his words echoing the grim reality. Another one, same as before. Silent nods exchanged, the puzzle of the victim's identity and motive began to unravel. Her elegant attire clashed with the humble setting, a stark reminder of a life cut short in a forgotten motel room. The manager, a specter of guilt looming in his haunted eyes, recounted the tragic discovery. Alone she checked in, alone she met her fate. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, only the chilling certainty that the killer was someone she knew. Back at the precinct, Reed pinned photographs to the board, connecting the dots between three women, each a mirror image of the other, each a victim of the same ruthless predator. The whispers of a serial killer haunted the station, a shadow lurking at the edges of reality. Autopsy results shed light on the methodical brutality of the crime, a death by strangulation, hands as the instrument of destruction. No traces of DNA under the victim's nails, no signs of violation. This was not a crime of impulse. This was personal, intimate, a twisted dance of power and control. Days blurred into nights as the investigation deepened, revealing a web of secrets woven around the victim, Elaine Werner. A financial analyst with no enemies, no known vices, no apparent reason to meet her end in such a desolate place. Reed's quest for truth led her to Werner's sister, a trembling witness to the tragedy. A whispered confession unveiled a forbidden liaison, a man known only as C, a man of shadows and deceit. The threads of the investigation led Reed to the labyrinthine world of corporate power and deception. Charles Emerson, a man of influence and charisma, presented a facade of innocence that belied the darkness within. Beneath the veneer of respectability lay a web of lies, a trail of breadcrumbs leading to his doorstep. The pieces of the puzzle fell into place as Emerson's alibi crumbled under scrutiny, his hollow denials ringing false in the ears of justice. Forensics uncovered the damning evidence, a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to his doorstep, a tapestry of deceit woven with the threads of his victims' lives. In the cold confines of the interrogation room, Emerson's mask slipped, revealing the true face of a monster. They threatened everything, his voice a hollow whisper of desperation. The trial brought closure, but for Reed, the echoes of that night lingered like a ghostly presence. The media dubbed it the door on the left case, a cautionary tale of darkness lurking in plain sight. Emerson's conviction offered a semblance of justice, a sliver of solace for the families left behind. Yet for Reed, the case remained an open wound, a reminder that behind every door, a secret may lie in wait. As the years passed, Reed found herself haunted by the specter of those lost souls, their keys to the unknown still locked away in the evidence locker. The hotel hallway stretched endlessly before her, each door a portal to untold mysteries. And in the silence of the night, the echoes of their whispers lingered, a reminder that some doors once opened can never be closed again. Story 13. The ancient library faced its final hour, marked for destruction by the hands of progress. The workers toiled tirelessly, nearing completion, when fate intervened in the form of a stumbled step. Among the dusty bookshelves, a hidden latch lay waiting to be found. With a gentle click, the heavy case swung open, unveiling a secret passage leading to a forgotten chamber. The air within was heavy with the weight of time, thick and undisturbed. No furniture adorned the room, save for a solitary chair at its center, firmly bolted to the floor. And etched repeatedly upon the wall, a haunting message echoed, "I am still here." The call went out to the construction foreman, who in turn summoned the authorities. What had begun as a routine demolition now veered into the realm of the mysterious and unsettling. Detective Morgan Walsh, a seasoned investigator with 2 decades of experience, entered the hidden room with a sense of trepidation. His flashlight sliced through the darkness, revealing the chilling words scrawled across the walls. "Secure the scene," Walsh commanded the officers, his voice resonating in the confined space. "No one disturbs a thing until forensics arrives." The history of the building whispered tales of intrigue. Once owned by the influential Harrington family, the library bore witness to a tragedy that had long haunted the community. The disappearance of their daughter, Rebecca, cast a shadow over the family for years. She had vanished without a trace during her final year of college, leaving behind only an abandoned car near the edge of the woods. Despite exhaustive efforts, the case had grown cold, shrouded in mystery and speculation. The prevailing belief was that she had chosen to escape her life, but her family clung to a darker truth. As forensic experts combed through the hidden room, they unearthed traces of hair and fibers embedded in the chair, alongside faint remnants of blood and skin cells within the scratches on the wall. Initial analysis hinted at a young female presence. "This chair was meant to confine someone," the analyst remarked, gesturing to the worn leather straps and bolt holes. "Whoever was held here fought fiercely." Detective Walsh delved deeper into the Harrington family's past, a nagging suspicion tugging at his mind. The timing of the library's donation to the public mere weeks after Rebecca's vanishing struck him as more than mere coincidence. Further digging unveiled a troubling connection. The contractor who installed the bookshelf leading to the hidden room had been closely tied to Maxwell Harrington, Rebecca's uncle and the patriarch of the family. Financial records hinted at payments that far exceeded standard renovation costs, raising questions of hidden motives. Former library staff shared their shock at the discovery, unaware of the concealed space's existence. One elderly librarian recalled Maxwell's peculiar insistence on preserving that particular section, spending solitary hours there long after closing time. He claimed it held historical significance, she recalled, a note of unease in her voice. The investigation took a grim turn when DNA evidence linked the biological material from the hidden chamber to Rebecca. The pieces of the puzzle began to align in a macabre pattern. Rebecca had not fled. She had been imprisoned behind the deceptive bookshelf, perhaps by a member of her own kin. Armed with a warrant, the detectives descended upon the Harrington estate, uncovering a damning journal hidden away in Maxwell's study. Its pages chronicled a disturbing fixation on his niece, culminating in a chilling entry. She knew too much. She will remain here until she learns her place. Confronted with the damning evidence, Maxwell's facade crumbled. She threatened to ruin everything, he confessed, his tone devoid of emotion. I couldn't let her destroy the family legacy. The truth emerged in all its horror: Rebecca's untimely demise at the hands of her own uncle, trapped behind a wall of secrets and lies. Beneath the floor of the hidden room, ground-penetrating radar confirmed the presence of human remains. A somber excavation revealed Rebecca's skeletal form, adorned with the silver bracelet her parents had gifted her years ago. The Harrington family faced the weight of justice as Maxwell's sentencing drew near, a chapter of closure amidst a tale of tragedy. The library's fate shifted from demolition to memorial, a place of remembrance for a life cut short and a truth long concealed. The community gathered, leaving tokens of respect at the entrance, honoring the memory of a lost soul whose voice had echoed through the ages, proclaiming, "I am still here." In the quiet shadows of the past, justice found its way to the light, a beacon of hope in the darkness of a long-buried secret. Story 14: Uncovering the Shadows. The echoes of renovations often resound with secrets long forgotten. In the quiet dance of dust particles, hidden treasures of the past emerge, a collection of memories, both beautiful and haunting. Sarah and Michael, drawn to the allure of a bygone era, found themselves entranced by the whispers of history within the walls of their new Victorian home. As they delicately lifted the floorboards, a delicate letter lay nestled beneath, a relic of time. The paper, fragile and worn, bore a cryptic message: "Don't trust the one who knocked." Before they could ponder its meaning, the house was pierced by 3 sharp raps, a chilling echo of warning. Detective Alina Reed, with a demeanor as calm as the shadows at dusk, arrived to unravel the enigma. With seasoned hands, she retrieved the note, its secrets already tainted by the touch of the unsuspecting couple. Reed, a seeker of truths shrouded in darkness, delved into the tangled web of the home's past, where layers of history intertwined with deceit. The house, once a sanctuary for the Hargrove family, held more than just memories within its ornate walls. Franklin and Margaret, guardians of secrets untold, had lived a life veiled in shadows. Franklin, a man of honor tainted by the allure of gambling debts, had unwittingly invited darkness into their once peaceful abode. The whispers of the past guided Reed through a labyrinth of half-truths and faded recollections. Franklin's descent into paranoia, Margaret's silent fears, each thread woven into the fabric of their shared existence. As the truth unraveled like tendrils of mist, a sinister figure emerged from the shadows of memory. Victor Mercer, a specter of the past, haunted the house with his unseen presence, a collector of debts unpaid, a ghost of vengeance unfulfilled. His fate, sealed within the confines of the crawl space, spoke of a tragic end to a life entwined with greed and desperation. Through the diaries of Margaret, Reed uncovered a tale of love twisted by circumstance, of loyalty tested by fear. The knocking that echoed through the halls, a ghostly reminder of secrets buried deep, resonated with the weight of unspoken truths. In the final act of justice, the remains of Victor Mercer found their resting place, a closure long overdue. Sarah and Michael, burdened by the weight of history, chose to part ways with the house, leaving its halls to echo with the whispers of the past. Yet in the hushed stillness of the night, rumors lingered like specters in the mist. 3 distinct knocks, a haunting refrain, echoed through the empty rooms, a reminder of the darkness that once lurked within the walls. The note, a silent sentinel in the hands of the law, bore a message that transcended time. Don't trust the one who knocked. As Detective Reed closed the case, a sense of unease lingered in the air, a mystery unsolved, a narrative unfinished. Some shadows, she mused, are meant to remain veiled in obscurity, their truths buried in the depths of the past, waiting to be uncovered by the curious and the brave. Story 15. She always avoided the attic, shying away from its mysteries. However, when a storm brought a leak in the roof, she had no choice but to venture up there. The attic was a realm of forgotten treasures, draped in layers of dust and cobwebs. Nestled in the darkest corner was an ancient dollhouse, intricately crafted, with its miniature furniture meticulously arranged. Yet a sense of unease washed over her as she gazed inside. The figures within were not mere dolls, they were delicate, hand-carved replicas of her own family. Each tiny figure positioned precisely as they sat downstairs, except for one. The figure meant to represent her stood by the attic door. Rebecca Morgan traced her finger along the dollhouse roof, feeling the indent where the small wooden figure stood. A chill ran down her spine, unrelated to the draft whispering through the rafters. The dollhouse had no place in this house. It wasn't her childhood home, but a rental property her family had recently moved into. The unsettling discovery prompted Rebecca to contact law enforcement in a panic. Officers arrived at the suburban residence to find a family in distress, gathered in the living room, reluctant to return upstairs. Detective Sarah Harmon, the lead investigator, initially dismissed their concerns as a prank or the product of an overactive imagination adjusting to a new environment. What struck Detective Harmon most was the intricate detail of the miniature figurines, capturing unique traits of each family member: the father's receding hairline, the teenage son's favorite hoodie, even the small birthmark on the mother's hand. The case took a chilling turn when forensic teams uncovered fingerprints on the dollhouse that did not match any family members. Even more alarming were microscopic cameras hidden in the eyes of each miniature figure, all linked to a sophisticated recording system beneath the dollhouse. Analysis of the Morgan family's movements revealed a disturbing revelation. The positions of the figures in the dollhouse mirrored not just their current evening, but exact postures from different days, suggesting a meticulous observer had been studying their every move. We realized this went beyond mere stalking, Detective Harmon explained. The perpetrator displayed a level of obsession rarely seen in criminal psychology. The investigation unveiled a concealed basement entrance behind a false pantry wall, leading to a makeshift living space where evidence indicated someone had been dwelling since before the Morgans' arrival. Food wrappers, water bottles, and a sleeping bag hinted at a hidden presence beneath the family for weeks. The absence of forced entry puzzled investigators. Property records revealed the house had remained vacant for almost a year before the Morgans moved in, previously owned by an elderly couple who had passed away. Interviews with neighbors provided little insight, except for one elderly woman who occasionally noticed lights in the vacant house. A breakthrough came through digital forensics, tracing the surveillance data to an external server in a nearby apartment. Inside, walls were adorned with photographs of the Morgan family and previous residents, alongside detailed journal entries of their daily routines. The most unsettling discovery was a workshop filled with partially constructed dollhouses representing various homes in the vicinity. The apartment belonged to Martin Wells, the son of the deceased homeowners. Financial records indicated mounting debt after his parents' deaths, prompting him to covertly live in the house while collecting rent. The dollhouse was his realm of control, a forensic psychologist explained. Each figure symbolized someone he observed. Rebecca's figure by the attic door wasn't a threat, it was his acknowledgement of her discovery. During interrogation, Wells remained eerily composed, attributing his actions to ensuring the family respected his childhood home. When asked about the positioned figures, he simply stated, "I wanted them to know I watched over them." Psychological evaluation revealed a case of possessive delusion. Wells struggled to accept losing his childhood residence, resorting to an elaborate scheme to retain control. The dollhouse became his way of possessing both the property and its tenants. The Morgan family never returned to the house, haunted by the realization that they had been unwittingly observed and manipulated. Wells faced multiple charges, including stalking and invasion of privacy. The case prompted a reevaluation of real estate disclosure laws and agent responsibilities. The judge emphasized the profound violation the Morgan family endured. The most unsettling aspect for criminologists was how long Wells could have continued his clandestine activities undetected if not for Rebecca's discovery. Though the Morgan family relocated far away, Rebecca's lingering unease persisted. She removed all dollhouses and miniatures from their new home, still haunted by the feeling of being watched. Some days I can't shake the sensation that somewhere, someone is manipulating a tiny version of me in a dollhouse I've yet to uncover. Story 16. The worn wooden plank shifted beneath her weight, a subtle movement that drew her focus downward. Intrigued, she knelt and traced the edges of the loosened board, sensing a hidden void beneath the seemingly solid floor. With deliberate care, she lifted the boards, revealing a shadowy, narrow space lurking beneath the foundation of her new home. In the dim light, she discerned the outlines of forgotten belongings: a mattress, a solitary chair, and in the corner, a weathered notebook filled with the repetition of a single name, her own. Detective Morgan Reed stood silently behind Sarah Coleman, observing the turmoil in her expression as she peered into the abyss beneath her dwelling. It was not merely the discovery of a hidden chamber that unsettled her, but rather the violation of her sanctuary, the intrusion of a malevolent presence into what was meant to be a fresh start. "Refrain from disturbing anything further," Detective Reed directed, her voice maintaining a serene authority. Switching on her flashlight, she cast light upon the concealed space, illuminating walls adorned with a collage of surveillance photographs capturing Sarah's every move entering buildings, conversing with acquaintances, walking to her car. A shrine of obsession woven into the very structure beneath her feet. Sarah had acquired the quaint cottage from the estate of a reclusive man named Walter Green, who had passed away without kin. The property had sat vacant for months before Sarah's purchase, described in real estate listings as charming and requiring minor updates. No mention had been made of any peculiarities during inspections or negotiations. "I never crossed paths with him, the previous owner," Sarah murmured. "Neighbors claimed he kept to himself. I was informed that the basement access had been sealed off long ago. That's what the inspection report indicated." As crime scene investigators arrived, their gear echoing against the wooden floors, they meticulously documented the scene, gathering evidence and retrieving the mattress, chair, and notebook from the clandestine chamber. Forensic analysts uncovered a plethora of fingerprints within the hidden space, all tracing back to Walter Green. What troubled the investigators most was the timeline. They reconstructed evidence suggested that Walter had been surveilling Sarah for at least 3 years prior to his demise, shadowing her routines and interactions without her knowledge. This level of fixation often escalates, the department's psychologist elucidated during a debriefing. The obsession transitions from mere fantasy to meticulous planning. The concealed room intimates that he was preparing for something more direct. Detective Reed's inquiries veered in an unforeseen direction when she interviewed Walter's former colleague from the local shopping center's maintenance department. The man appeared uneasy, toying with his wedding band as they conversed. Walter would mention her occasionally, he confessed. Claimed she reminded him of someone. I assumed it was harmless infatuation. I never imagined. His voice trailed off, his gaze fixed on his hands. Did he ever articulate any intentions involving her? Reed probed further. Not explicitly, but he had this refrain. He'd say how she belonged with him. I dismissed it as idle chatter. Securing a warrant to examine Walter's workplace locker, untouched since his passing, Reed's team uncovered a key unmatched to any locks in Walter's residence. Tracing its serial number, they arrived at a storage unit listed in his name. The metallic door groaned open, revealing an eerie sight: meticulously arranged furnishings mirroring Sarah's previous apartment, from her bed to her desk, even her living room layout. A mannequin sporting a wig akin to Sarah's hairstyle sat at the duplicate desk. Most chilling of all was a calendar highlighting a date precisely 1 week after Walter's sudden demise from a heart attack, the day encircled in crimson with a solitary word inscribed upon it: together. Further investigation disclosed Walter's institutionalization in his youth due to an infatuation with a female teacher, diagnosed with erotomania, an affliction wherein the patient delusionally believes reciprocated affection despite evidence to the contrary. Released and living uneventfully for decades, something in Sarah had reignited his dormant fixation. At the precinct, Reed spread crime scene photographs across the table. At the end, he was convinced of a special bond between them. In his mind, they were destined to be united. Is there a chance she inadvertently encountered him somewhere, triggering this fixation? Inquired a fellow detective. No evidence to support that theory. Sometimes obsessions require only a small catalyst, a fleeting smile from a stranger, prolonged eye contact. For someone of his history, that could have been enough. Sarah resolved to sell the house, unable to shake the sense of unease that now pervaded its walls. During the final walkthrough with her real estate agent, she stood in the living room, arms wrapped around herself. I can't help but wonder what might have occurred if he hadn't passed away then, she whispered. If that loose floorboard hadn't caught my attention, how long would I have dwelled here, oblivious to his surveillance, unaware of the secrets concealed beneath my very feet? Following Walter's demise, the case was officially closed, classified as stalking with intent to abduct, despite the absence of an actual abduction. Psychological evaluations deduced that Walter had plotted to confine Sarah within either the hidden chamber or the storage unit. Sarah relocated, altering her routines and safeguarding her personal information. Detective Reed intermittently checked in on her, a silent acknowledgement of how narrowly Sarah had evaded becoming another statistic, another casualty. The cottage transitioned into the possession of a young couple oblivious to its dark past. The hidden room was sealed, the floorboards exchanged. Life carried on. Yet for those privy to the truth, the tale of the concealed chamber beneath the floor served as a haunting reminder of the unseen perils that lurk, of monsters who evade capture, and of victims who remain unaware of the precipice they once stood upon. Story 17, the unexpected delivery arrived without a return label, shrouded in mystery. A cardboard box, damp with morning dew, landed on Sarah Miller's porch. It wasn't meant for her, the address correct, but the name wrong. Ignoring it would have been the sensible choice. Leaving it untouched would have been the safe option. Yet curiosity whispered to Sarah, coaxing her to unravel the enigma within. With cautious hands, she peeled away the tape, anticipating mundane contents like books or clothes. Instead, nestled inside was a VHS tape, accompanied by a solitary sticky note bearing a cryptic message: "Watch alone." Sarah held the black plastic cassette, feeling its weight press against her palms, an inexplicable heaviness hinting at hidden secrets. Tracing her fingers along the worn edges, she absorbed the peculiar energy emanating from the tape. The handwritten note bore the imprint of urgency, each stroke etched with a plea for attention. Amidst the backdrop of her suburban surroundings, where everyday life unfolded in a symphony of normalcy, Sarah's world was about to tilt into the unknown. Bringing the mysterious package inside, she hesitated, uncertainty clouding her mind. The name Daniel Whitaker meant nothing to her, a stranger's identity intruding into her reality. Her home had once belonged to the Johnsons, a distant memory of an elderly couple who had left their mark on the house. Curiosity wrestled with unease as Sarah's gaze flickered towards the VCR, a relic of the past that now beckoned her towards an unforeseen journey. Against her better judgment, Sarah inserted the tape. Static danced on the screen, gradually sharpening into focus to reveal a dimly lit room. The camera angle skewed, casting shadows across a man seated in a wooden chair. As Daniel Whitaker's voice filled the room, a tale of innocence entangled in darkness unfolded. His words painted a portrait of a man falsely accused, a victim of circumstances beyond his control. Detective Eliza Ramirez found herself entangled in a web of deceit as she delved into the case of Catherine Walsh's murder. The appearance of mysterious tapes, each carrying Daniel Whitaker's desperate plea, unraveled a narrative far more complex than initially perceived. A whistleblower silenced, a pharmaceutical giant exposed, and a man framed for a crime he did not commit. As the investigation unfolded, Sarah Miller found herself drawn deeper into the labyrinth of secrets, each package revealing a piece of the puzzle. Documents exposing corporate corruption, a trail of breadcrumbs leading to the truth, and a journey towards redemption for a man wronged by fate. In a twist of fate, Sarah's keen eye uncovered a crucial clue, leading to the unraveling of a sinister plot. Justice, elusive yet inevitable, dawned upon the shadows of deceit as the perpetrators were brought to light. Daniel Whitaker emerged from the shadows, a survivor of a storm he never anticipated, forever changed by the ordeal. Standing on Sarah's porch, the echoes of truth reverberated between them. In a moment of quiet reflection, they pondered the fragile balance between reality and illusion. The wrong address, a serendipitous mistake, had set in motion a chain of events that would alter their lives forever. The VHS tapes, once symbols of deception, now stood as testaments to resilience and the unwavering pursuit of truth. In a world where darkness lurked behind every corner, they served as beacons of light, guiding the way towards a future untainted by lies. Story 18. The calf had become his sanctuary, a place of quiet contemplation amidst the bustling city. Every morning he would take his usual spot at the corner table, his presence a familiar sight to the barista who served him his black coffee, no sugar. No one knew his name. He was simply the man in the navy coat with the worn leather messenger bag, but one day he didn't show up. When Detective Sarah Mercer was called to investigate his sudden disappearance, she delved into a mystery unlike any she had encountered before. The security footage revealed a man known only as John Doe entering the caf, taking his seat, and then vanishing into thin air. No trace, no explanation, just an empty chair and a wallet left behind. As Mercer studied the footage, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that crept over her. There was something inexplicably eerie about the way John Doe had ceased to exist within the confines of the caf. His identity, a blank space in a world filled with information and connections. The wallet held no answers, only more questions. Blank spaces where a name should have been, credit cards linked to non-existent accounts, and a phone number that led to silence. The more Mercer dug, the more elusive John Doe became, as if he were a ghost haunting the caf. The notebook left on the table yielded no clarity either, its pages filled with cryptic symbols and sketches of buildings that defied reality. Mercer enlisted the help of cryptographers, but even they struggled to decipher the enigmatic writings. As the investigation unfolded, Mercer discovered a peculiar detail in the security footage, a flicker in the time stamp whenever John Doe entered the caf. It was a subtle anomaly, easily dismissed as a glitch, but Mercer couldn't ignore the feeling that it held significance. Her attention turned to an antique mirror hanging in the caf, its ornate frame adorned with symbols reminiscent of those in John Doe's notebook. Could this mirror be the key to unlocking the mystery of his disappearance? When the mirror was removed, a hidden compartment was revealed, containing identical wallets and a journal filled with entries dating back decades, all penned by John Doe. The final entry spoke of experiments in temporal displacement and identity transference, hinting at a reality beyond comprehension. As Mercer delved deeper into the case, strange occurrences plagued the caf, reflections moving independently, sightings of John Doe where he shouldn't be. The veil between worlds seemed to thin, blurring the boundaries of what was real and what was imagined. A breakthrough came in the form of Margaret Keller, a former physicist who shed light on John Doe's true identity as Daniel Weston, a brilliant scientist lost to an experiment involving quantum mirrors and parallel realities. Weston had theorized about crossing over between worlds, using the caf as an anchor point. Mercer's investigation led her back to the caf's roots, revealing that it stood on the grounds of Weston's former research facility. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, painting a picture of a man who dared to defy the boundaries of existence. In a chilling revelation, Mercer witnessed two versions of Weston in the security footage, one watching himself from the mirror's reflection. The experiment had reached its conclusion, the window between worlds closing as swiftly as it had opened. As the caf closed its doors and the building was razed to the ground, the mystery of the man who didn't exist remained unsolved. Daniel Weston's fate was sealed within the echoes of the past, leaving behind a legacy of curiosity and fear. Detective Mercer's departure from the force marked the end of one chapter, but her connection to the enigmatic case endured. Neighbors whispered of her late-night vigils, her frantic scribblings in a notebook mirroring Weston's own. and in her home, a fragment of an antique mirror hung on the wall, a silent witness to the secrets it held within its shattered glass. Story 19: The Secret Observer. Realtor's listing made no mention of a basement. The blueprints held no clue to its existence. Yet when the family uncovered a hidden door beneath the old carpet, intrigue gripped them. A heavy, rusted handle begged to be opened. With joint effort, they pried it ajar. Stale air, thick with the scent of damp earth, greeted them as they descended into darkness. Expecting storage, they discovered a solitary chair beneath a swaying light bulb. Upon the wall hung a row of photographs, portraits of themselves. The Mercer family settled into their suburban home in the midst of winter's early darkness and bare trees. The aged structure exuded character and history, they had thought. Little did they realize the depth of history the house held and how violently it would intertwine with their present. Detective Sarah Connors and her partner arrived at the property, finding the crime scene unit already at work, securing the area with fluttering yellow tape. Mrs. Mercer's shaky voice had relayed the unsettling discovery beneath their living room floor. "We must document everything before anyone else enters," Connors commanded, donning latex gloves with precision. Camera flashes illuminated the stairwell as the forensic team captured the scene. The wooden steps groaned underfoot, leading to a small basement space with concrete walls and a lone chair bolted to the floor beneath a harshly lit bulb. The wall of photographs, arranged in chronological order, captured the family's every move. The investigation unveiled no forced entry, no theft, only a violation of their privacy and sense of security. Fingerprints belonging to previous owners peppered the basement, hinting at a disturbing past. Interviewing past owners unearthed a troubling pattern of secrecy surrounding the property. Altered blueprints, withdrawn permits, redacted inspection reports, each detail adding a layer of mystery. The contractor who had renovated the house 7 years prior vehemently denied the existence of the basement, claiming to have gutted the space down to its foundation. Digital forensics revealed a hidden memory card containing countless images of families past. Audio files, recovered from a concealed box, captured intimate conversations held within the home. The investigation escalated as the extent of the surveillance network became apparent. A narrow passage led to a monitoring station, revealing a journal chronicling the families in intricate detail. The journal's final entry ominously foretold the arrival of the next family. Fingerprint analysis confirmed the chilling truth: Edward Kelvin, the house's builder, had never left. He had embedded himself within the walls, watching, documenting, believing the families to be his. Kelvin was discovered hiding within the house, his delusions laid bare as he spoke of the families as his own. A psychological evaluation deemed him unfit, trapped in a world of his making. The Mercer family fled, leaving behind a house designed for surveillance. The trial exposed Kelvin's elaborate surveillance network, painting a picture of a man consumed by his own delusions. The house, once a haven for the unsuspecting families, now stood as a monument to intrusion. Demolished and erased, the memories of its dark past lingered in the minds of those who had called it home. Whispers of uncertainty haunted the former residents, questioning if they had ever truly been alone. The specter of Edward Kelvin's presence lingered in the corners of their minds, a reminder of the hidden eyes that had watched their every move. The house may have been gone, but its legacy of secrets endured, a chilling reminder of the thin veil between safety and surveillance. Story 20. The tale of the mysterious Victorian-era home unfolded like a delicate dance between the past and the present. Michael and Sarah Klein, unsuspecting newcomers to the charming residence, stumbled upon a secret hidden within the peeling layers of wallpaper. What started as a simple renovation project soon spiraled into a haunting discovery that would unravel a decades-old mystery. As the couple delicately peeled away the damaged wallpaper in the master bedroom, they uncovered a hidden history etched in ink on the walls. The same name, Eleanor Winters, repeated relentlessly in a frenzy of uneven script, sending shivers down their spines. Who was Eleanor Winters, and why was her name inscribed so fervently in the forgotten layers of time? Their curiosity ignited, Michael and Sarah embarked on a quest for answers, delving into the depths of the internet and dusty archives. To their astonishment, they unearthed a single thread linking Eleanor Winters to a missing persons case from long ago. The woman in the faded photograph bore a striking resemblance to the enigmatic seller of the house, Margaret Cavendish. As dusk settled over the quaint neighborhood, the whispers of the past grew louder, urging the couple to unravel the tangled web of secrets woven within the walls of their newfound abode. Sarah's fingertips traced the haunting name, Eleanor Winters, as Michael sifted through faded newspaper clippings and faded memories. With each passing day, the line between reality and illusion blurred, drawing them deeper into the mystery that lingered like a ghostly presence in the air. The walls of the old Victorian home held more than just memories. They held the echoes of a life lost to time, waiting to be uncovered. Their home transformed into a sanctuary of secrets, a haven for the restless spirits of the past seeking closure. The discovery of hidden compartments and forgotten identities only deepened the enigma, leading them down a path fraught with uncertainty and danger. As the investigation unfolded, the truth emerged like a specter from the shadows, revealing a tale of obsession, fractured identities, and a tragic end. Eleanor Winters, lost to the world for decades, found her voice through the scribbled name on the walls, a silent plea for justice. And as the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place, Michael and Sarah stood witness to a revelation that transcended time and space. The walls themselves whispered of betrayal and redemption, of a soul trapped in a labyrinth of madness and deceit. In the quiet of the night, as the moon cast its ethereal glow upon the house, the truth unfurled like a fragile flower blooming in the darkness. The mystery of Eleanor Winters and Margaret Cavendish intertwined in a dance of fate, leaving an indelible mark on the history of their dream home. And so, as the stars twinkled overhead and the world drifted into slumber, Michael and Sarah found solace in the knowledge that some mysteries were meant to be unraveled, even if they came at a cost. The walls whispered their secrets to the wind, carrying the echoes of a bygone era into the realm of dreams, where truth and illusion intertwined in a timeless embrace. Story 21, The Mysterious Tale of the Vanished Families. The ancient box lay hidden beneath layers of clutter in the attic, a silent witness to the passage of time in the old house. Among the forgotten relics within were faded Polaroids, snapshots of joyous occasions and cherished memories. But one photo stood out from the rest, shrouded in an unsettling aura of mystery. In that final picture, taken in the familiar living room, a family sat on the couch, bathed in the soft glow of the evening light. Yet these were not the faces Rebecca recognized as her own, and in the shadows behind them, a figure loomed, a specter watching from the hallway with an intensity that sent shivers down her spine. As Rebecca gazed at the photograph, a sense of unease settled upon her, causing her fingers to quiver slightly as she held the Polaroid. The family in the image, complete with a woman of honey blonde hair, a bespectacled man, and two children, smiled obliviously at the camera, unaware of the ominous presence lurking nearby. Descending the creaking wooden stairs, Rebecca brought the photo to the stark light of the kitchen, where she scrutinized it with a growing sense of dread. The resemblance to her own home was uncanny: the familiar archway, the ornate crown molding, the bay window that welcomed the dawn's first light. Yet these strangers occupied a space that was meant to be hers alone. A seasoned detective, Morgan, arrived clad in a weathered leather jacket that whispered of past investigations. With eyes that missed no detail, he examined the photograph with a methodical air, his gloved hand tracing the edge of the Polaroid before turning it over to reveal a blank back. "What do you know of the Nelsons, the previous owners of this house?" Morgan's voice rumbled low, probing for answers in the shadows of the past. Rebecca confessed her limited knowledge, explaining that the Nelsons had relocated out of state before she had taken possession of the property. Nodding thoughtfully, Morgan requested to take the photo, hopeful that his team could uncover the truth behind the enigmatic family captured within. And so the quiet investigation began, unraveling a web of vanished occupants who had once called the house their home. The Nelsons had acquired the property from the Crawfords, who in turn had succeeded the Mornos. Detective Morgan delved into property records, interviewed former neighbors, and pieced together a haunting timeline of transient residents. A breakthrough emerged unexpectedly when a retired mail carrier identified the family in the photo as the Sutherlands, who had resided in the house for a mere year before vanishing without a trace. Their disappearance mirrored a pattern that stretched back through the annals of time, a pattern of families disappearing after a single year of dwelling within those hallowed walls. Forensic analysis dated the photograph to 15 years prior, unveiling eerie details that hinted at a sinister truth. The stillness of the subjects, the suspended particles in the air, all pointed to a staged scene, a moment frozen in time by an unseen hand. Further scrutiny of the shadowy figure in the hallway revealed a tall, enigmatic presence cloaked in darkness, his intent gaze fixed upon the unsuspecting family. And as the investigation delved deeper, a chilling revelation unfurled: a history of families vanishing into the ether, leaving behind only whispers of their existence. The focus shifted to the house's basement, where ground-penetrating radar unearthed anomalies beneath the concrete floor. With each strike of the jackhammer, the scent of decay grew stronger until the truth was laid bare. Beneath the earth lay the remains of the missing families, preserved in a macabre tableau of forgotten lives. Among their possessions, a camera emerged, a device that had captured the fleeting happiness of each family before their untimely disappearance. And within the confines of a hidden crawlspace in the attic, a chilling discovery awaited: a cot, a journal of meticulous observations, and a foreboding entry hinting at an impending reckoning. Rebecca, now under police protection, was forced to confront the malevolent force that had haunted the house for decades. As the investigation unfolded, a sinister presence lingered in the shadows, watching, waiting for its next victim to unknowingly step into its trap. And so the house stood silent and forsaken, its secrets buried within its walls, waiting to ensnare the unsuspecting souls who dared to seek the truth. The mystery of Samuel Whitfield, the enigmatic architect turned phantom, remained unsolved, his spectral presence echoing through the empty rooms of the house. As the night descended, the sound of a ringing phone shattered the stillness, signaling a haunting reminder that some mysteries were never meant to be unraveled. And in the darkness, new photographs developed, capturing the essence of new families, new homes, and the chilling presence of a watcher in the shadows, a presence that would forever haunt the dreams of those who dared to peer into the abyss. Story 22. The gentle current whispered secrets as it glided along the river's edge, the water shimmering like liquid glass under the morning sun. The fisherman, lost in the tranquility of the moment, almost missed the peculiar sight of a lone suitcase bobbing near the shore. Initially dismissing it as a discarded heap of old clothes, he felt a shiver run down his spine as he waded closer, the pungent odor assaulting his senses, thick, suffocating, a harbinger of the macabre. The case was bound in chains, its edges tinged with rust from exposure to the elements. When authorities pried it open, the contents revealed a chilling tale, not garments, but strands of hair, fingers frozen in a haunting grip. And nestled at the bottom, a cryptic note that whispered foreboding words, "This isn't the first." Detective Sarah Mercer, with a handkerchief pressed delicately to her nose, surveyed the grim tableau before her. The victim, a woman in her mid-30s, her dark hair now matted and her once pale skin marred by the touch of water, lay silently as the medical examiner meticulously documented every detail. It wasn't the method of disposal that unsettled Mercer the most, but the eerie sense of reverence in the way the victim had been prepared: manicured nails, recently styled hair, adorned in opulent attire. The woman was identified as Catherine Walsh, a real estate agent renowned for her prowess in selling luxurious properties. Divorced, childless, she lived a solitary existence in the confines of an upscale neighborhood. Colleagues painted a picture of a driven, meticulous individual who guarded her privacy with zeal. Her disappearance had been flagged by her assistant, who adamantly asserted that missing a crucial appointment with affluent clients was inconceivable for Walsh, as it would have secured her most significant commission to date. As investigators meticulously combed through Walsh's meticulously kept modernist abode, a stark contrast presented itself. Perfection reigned supreme. Every facet of her life seemed meticulously curated, from the designer furniture aligned with precision to the immaculate surfaces devoid of any blemish. Yet a whisper of disarray in her home office hinted at a hidden truth. Ajar, a drawer harbored a leather-bound journal that unveiled a cryptic entry: "He's watching again." The same car, different plates. Delving into Walsh's digital trail, a curious pattern emerged: numerous messages from unknown senders bearing a singular phrase: "I see your perfection," synchronized in their delivery at precise intervals. Her online pursuits reflected a quest for security measures and personal defense mechanisms, painting a portrait of a woman besieged by an unseen menace. Mercer pieced together the puzzle, connecting the dots between the meticulous arrangement of the victim's remains and the unsettling messages, a tapestry of ritualistic precision woven by a methodical hand. "Our perpetrator is a master of control," she shared with her partner. "This was no crime of passion. This was an orchestrated ceremony." A breakthrough emanated from an unexpected source: a local pawnshop owner, identifying Walsh's distinctive emerald necklace among the missing possessions. The culprit, Michael Linden, a nondescript maintenance worker, had frequented Walsh's domain under the guise of his profession, slipping in and out unnoticed, meticulously crafting his sinister designs. Upon raiding Linden's unassuming dwelling, a chilling revelation unfurled: photographs of Walsh and other women, their likenesses eerily similar, their unaware poses frozen in time. Behind a clandestine wall lay a shrine of Obsession's personal effects meticulously arranged, each item a relic of his twisted devotion, chronicled in meticulous detail. In the sterile confines of the interrogation room, Lyndon, his demeanor unflinching, unveiled the depths of his deranged fixation. They were flawed, he intoned, devoid of emotion. They paraded perfection, but I saw through their faade. Catherine, with her disorganized desk, her imperfect lipstick application, her perfection was a facade. The search for the elusive first victims alluded to in his cryptic note unveiled 2 additional suitcases, each housing a woman akin to Walsh in appearance and profession, real estate agents who espoused a facade of flawlessness. As Lyndon stood trial, a specter of unease hung heavy in the courtroom, the families of the victims bearing witness to the unveiling of his meticulous methodology. Though justice was served with a sentence of life imprisonment, Detective Mercer found solace elusive, haunted by unanswered questions that lingered in the shadows. What catalyzed Lyndon's fixation on these particular women, and what fractured reflection of himself did he seek to mend through his gruesome acts? The river, ever a silent witness to the unfolding drama, continued its unhurried journey downstream, carrying away all traces of the grim saga. Yet on Mercer's desk at the precinct lay copies of Lyndon's chilling journals, a stark reminder that beneath the veneer of normalcy, darkness may lurk, and the most insidious predators may dwell in plain sight, their gaze unrelenting, waiting for the slightest imperfection to be revealed. Story 23. In the attic, beneath a worn blanket, they stumbled upon a porcelain doll, delicate and ancient, with wide, unblinking blue eyes painted on its face. Sarah and Michael, a young couple, chuckled at the sight, dismissing it as just another forgotten relic. But that night, a strange feeling settled over them as they drifted to sleep. The air thickened, the silence stretched, and come morning, the doll had vanished from the attic, only to reappear at the foot of their bed. Sarah and Michael had been captivated by the Victorian house's intricate woodwork and enigmatic allure when they bought it at auction. Little did they know of the unsettling history entwined within its walls, a history that would soon entangle them within its mysteries. Detective Rachel Winters, on a crisp autumn morning, received a call about a chilling discovery in the house. A woman, the female victim, found in the master bedroom in a contorted pose, eyes wide with terror. Her partner, the male victim, lay in the hallway as though attempting to flee. The scene meticulously clean, devoid of forced entry or signs of struggle beyond those final moments. The positioning is intentional, Detective Winters murmured into her recorder as she observed the eerie tableau. The woman, like a doll plucked from a diorama. The investigation unfolded with interviews of neighbors, each account adding a layer of unease to the already unsettling case. Microscopic fibers found throughout the house hinted at a connection to antique doll clothing, vintage cotton and silk, concentrated around the victims and the attic. Yet no fingerprints, no DNA, no trace of an intruder, as if the perpetrator existed beyond the physical realm. Digging into the property's past revealed a pattern of deaths under mysterious circumstances, each previous owner meeting an untimely end. Tales of antique toys appearing out of thin air and phantom footsteps haunting the halls echoed through the decades. A newspaper clipping unveiled the tragic story of a doll maker and his daughter, with a final doll, a perfect replica, completed before his demise. Sarah and Michael's renovations in the attic unveiled hidden photographs of the doll maker's collection, one doll standing out the same doll that had materialized in their home. Infrared scans exposed unseen handprints trailing from attic to bedroom, along with an enigmatic residue. A descendant of the doll maker spoke of dark rituals and bound spirits, hinting at a sinister force at play. The investigation hit a dead end, the truth obscured by shadows and whispers. Detective Winters, keeping the doll as evidence, found herself in a perplexing situation when it vanished from a locked cabinet, leaving her with fragmented memories of the night. The house changed hands once more, its haunted past driving down its value. The new owners discovered an empty attic, save for a neatly folded blanket. The doll remained at large, as Sarah and Michael's deaths joined the roster of unsolved mysteries. Detective Winters, retiring with a heavy heart, safeguarded a photograph of the doll maker, a grim reminder of the haunting legacy left behind. The new owners, opting to leave the attic undisturbed, occasionally heard whispers and glimpsed fleeting shadows, a lingering presence of the past. Story 24, the hushed town kept silent about the dwelling at the edge of the woods. It lingered solitary, its windows shrouded in darkness, its porch burdened by the weight of time. Nobody laid claim to it. Nobody could recall its origins. Yet when a band of wanderers strayed too near, they stumbled upon a peculiar sight, names etched into the wooden panels, carved deep like cryptic messages. At the foot of the list, untouched by weathering, appeared a name unfamiliar to all. Until a whisper quivered through the group, "That name is mine." The call pierced the stillness of night. Dispatch logged it as a routine trespassing incident. The voice at the other end belonged to Mason Wright, the primary hiker who uncovered his name engraved on the forsaken house. The responding officers anticipated mere mischief, perhaps the handiwork of daring youths, but what awaited them defied rational explanation. Detective Sarah Keller arrived as twilight cloaked the forest. Her flashlight beam sliced through the shadows, revealing the aged facade of the building. The names 27 in total spanned vertically along the eastern wall. Some had faded with time, blending into the weathered wood. Others remained sharp as though freshly carved. And at the base, Mason Wright, the incision still bearing traces of fresh sawdust. "I've never set foot here before," Mason asserted, his breath forming wisps in the chilly air. "I can't fathom how anyone would know my name." The inquiry commenced with scrutinizing background checks on each listed name. The findings sent shivers down the spines of the detective team. Every name corresponded to an individual reported missing over the past 4 decades. Some cases had grown cold, others remained active. Yet all shared a chilling commonality: the individuals vanished while hiking alone. Forensic experts meticulously photographed each inscription, noting the depths, techniques, and weathering patterns. The earliest name, Rebecca Hansen, aligned with a missing person case from 37 years earlier. Reports detailed a young woman who ventured into these very woods and never returned, with search parties uncovering naught but a lone hiking boot by a stream. Detective Keller extensively interviewed Mason. His account remained unwavering. He bore no ties to the area beyond this excursion with 4 college companions. They had selected the trail at random, guided by an online suggestion. Nothing in his background linked him to any of the other names adorning the wall outside. The focus of the investigation shifted to Mason's comrades. Emily Chen, the group's photographer, presented images captured during their hike. Upon scrutiny, analysts discerned a disquieting presence, a blurred figure lurking in the background of 3 distinct photos. The silhouette resembled a towering, slender man, always partially obscured by trees. We never spotted anyone else along the trail, Emily maintained. We would have remembered. Detective Keller sanctioned a search of the house's interior. Though the structure appeared deserted, dust blanketing every surface, furniture in disarray, officers unearthed a disconcerting revelation in the basement. Personal effects belonging to the missing hikers were meticulously arranged on wooden shelves. Watches, backpacks, cameras, wallets, each item tagged with a corresponding name from the exterior wall. Evidence technicians methodically cataloged every article. Beneath ultraviolet light, bloodstains emerged on the concrete floor, years of blemishes that someone had endeavored to erase. Despite ground-penetrating radar unveiling no buried bodies beneath the house, cadaver dogs repeatedly indicated the densest part of the forest at the property's rear. As the inquiry intensified, Detective Keller observed peculiar conduct from Mason Wright. He began recounting eerie incidents, murmurs outside his residence, fresh snow bearing enigmatic footprints leading to his door but vanishing thereafter, shadowy figures lurking in the street. The department assigned an officer for his protection, yet Mason's paranoia mounted. A breakthrough surfaced when researchers exhumed land records concealed in county archives. The house had belonged to a reclusive hunter named Victor Blackwood. Locals seldom glimpsed him, recounting brief encounters with an unsettlingly tall, emaciated figure who shunned conversation. Blackwood vanished without a trace 15 years prior, his disappearance never probed officially. Detective Keller secured a warrant for a deeper exploration of the surrounding forest. The search party unearthed a network of primitive hunting blinds strategically positioned along frequented hiking routes. Within one blind lay a journal brimming with meticulous observations, depictions of hikers, their paths, gear, and routines. The script matched samples from Victor Blackwood's scant documents. The entries grew progressively unsettling. Early pages delineated hunting tactics for wildlife. Later accounts depicted humans as quarry, their behaviors, vulnerabilities, and Blackwood's methods for their collection. The final pages detailed the stalking of each victim on the wall, along with elaborate descriptions of target selection. The pursuit for Blackwood mobilized across multiple jurisdictions. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging scoured the forest. Tactical teams combed every crevice and cave systematically, yet the suspect remained elusive. Mason Wright ceased answering calls. Officers dispatched to his abode discovered the door ajar, the rooms deserted. Freshly engraved on his bedroom wall was a solitary line: "The hunter becomes the hunted." The quest for Mason persisted fruitlessly for weeks. Then, during a secondary sweep of Blackwood's residence, forensic technicians stumbled upon a harrowing revelation. Concealed behind a false wall in the basement lay a small workshop housing woodworking tools, jars of wood preservatives, and a newly carved piece of wood bearing a fresh name not yet affixed to the external wall. Detective Keller recognized the name instantly. It belonged to the chief forensic technician who had processed the house during the initial investigation. The technician had called in sick that morning, unreachable by phone. Authorities erected a continuous surveillance perimeter around the house. Cameras recorded every approach, motion sensors vigilant for intruders. The trap was set. 3 nights later, sensors alerted. Security footage captured a figure emerging from the forest, unfathomably tall and slender, moving with unnatural fluidity. As tactical teams closed in, the cameras momentarily lost connection. Upon restoration, the figure had vanished. To this day, the house remains under constant watch. Mason Wright and the forensic technician elude discovery. The investigation persists, with fresh resources allocated as similar vanishings unfold in other wooded realms. The names etched on the wall have ascended to legend among law enforcers. Some officers refrain from uttering them aloud, others steer clear of the case entirely. And local hikers steer clear of the house, apprehensive that even mentioning it might consign their names to that dreaded list, the names unspoken. Story 25. The tale of the new homeowners and the mysterious intercom system was no mere quirk in the night. It began with a crackle, a faint whisper cutting through the darkness. The old system, a relic of bygone days, seemed to hold secrets long forgotten. Daniel and Meredith Parker had found themselves drawn to the Victorian manor, its ancient oak trees standing sentinel around the weathered exterior that concealed a modern interior. The intercom, a vintage feature connecting every room, crackled and hummed with a life of its own. Late one night, curiosity nudged the husband to press the button, and a whisper crept through the speaker, chilling him to the core. "Why did you come back?" The words hung heavy in the air, sending shivers down his spine. His wife, standing close behind, denied ever speaking those haunting words. Detective Sarah Reeves arrived at the property, the gravel crunching beneath her tires as she sensed an unseen presence lingering in the shadows. A call about a possible break-in had led her here, but there was a deeper mystery waiting to be unraveled. Daniel, with a ghostly pallor, recounted the unsettling events that had unfolded since the whispers began. The discovery behind the wall, hidden in the depths of the house, revealed a dark secret buried for decades. A leather-bound journal belonging to Alina shed light on her suspicions of her husband Vincent's malevolent intentions. The final entry, penned 30 years prior, hinted at a tragic end to Alina's story, a tale of betrayal and violence that had remained hidden for far too long. As the investigation delved deeper, the truth emerged from beneath the concrete foundation of the garden shed. Human remains, a silent witness to a long-forgotten crime, told a story of a life cut short by treachery. The gold wedding band, engraved with the words "To Alina, my eternal love," spoke of promises broken and a love twisted into something sinister. Vincent Blackwood, now elderly and confined to a care facility, confessed to the heinous crime that had haunted the house for years. His chilling admission revealed a web of deception carefully woven to conceal his dark deeds. The justice system swiftly moved to hold him accountable for his actions, but the echoes of Alina's voice lingered, a reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded within those walls. Daniel and Meredith, unable to bear the weight of the house's secrets, made the difficult decision to part ways with the property. A solemn memorial for Alina was held in the garden, a final tribute to a woman whose voice had been silenced for too long. The intercom system, a conduit for the whispers of the past, was removed by the new owners, its static and echoes fading into the shadows. Detective Reeves, as she closed the case file for the last time, felt a sense of closure wash over her. The house, once a silent witness to a terrible crime, had finally revealed its secrets, its walls echoing with the truth of what had transpired within. The legacy of the house that answered back would live on in whispers carried on the wind, a reminder that some stories refuse to be forgotten. Story 26. The weathered envelope bore the marks of time, its corners tinged with a faded yellow hue, yet the stamp adorning it was crisp, indicating recent dispatch. With cautious hands, the detective unfolded it, revealing a lone sheet of paper bearing a message typed in a rushed, uneven script. "I am sorry for what I did." A faint dampness clung to the paper, carrying with it a metallic scent that lingered in the air. It was only upon closer inspection that the reddish streak at the bottom edge caught their attention, a telltale sign that it was not mere ink staining the page. Detective Sarah Morgan, donning her gloves with practiced precision, secured the letter in an evidence bag. The forensics team's findings confirmed her suspicions. The reddish stain was indeed human blood, its DNA a match to an unsolved homicide case that had plagued the department for years. The victim, a young journalist by the name of Rebecca Warren, had met a tragic end in her own apartment, her body bearing multiple stab wounds. Her laptop had vanished, her notes scattered, a grim testament to a potential connection between her murder and the story she had been pursuing. Despite exhaustive interviews and countless hours of investigation, the case had grown cold until the arrival of this mysterious letter addressed simply to the Homicide Division. The scant fingerprints on the paper and envelope hinted at a cautious sender, one who had likely taken care to wear gloves. However, the postmark provided a vital clue, breathing new life into the stagnant investigation. Gathering her team in the dimly lit briefing room, Morgan affixed the image of the letter to the board adorned with haunting crime scene photos and fruitless leads. "This changes everything," she declared softly, the weight of the unsolved mystery heavy in the air. "Our perpetrator shows remorse." Detective James Chen, her steadfast partner since the case's inception, scrutinized the letter thoughtfully. "Or perhaps they seek to deceive us with false contrition," he suggested, his voice a whisper in the quiet room. "The blood may be a macabre charade meant to mock us." The forensic experts traced the unique typewriter impressions to a model long out of production, a relic of the past but not beyond reach. They embarked on a quest, reaching out to antique vendors and collectors across the region in pursuit of the elusive machine. Meanwhile, they delved deeper into Rebecca's life, uncovering her relentless pursuit of truth and justice as a journalist unafraid to expose corruption. Her editor painted a portrait of a determined soul, dedicated to unraveling the mysteries that hid in the shadows. Rebecca's final investigation had delved into a wealthy family entangled in local politics, their dark secrets bubbling beneath the surface following the patriarch's demise. Family feuds and whispered accusations painted a grim picture, casting shadows over the once respected name. Interviewing Rebecca's boyfriend, Michael Barnes, revealed a shift in his demeanor since their last encounter. Subtle signs of unease now danced in his eyes, his hands betraying a nervous tremor. Rebecca spoke of being followed, he confessed, his words laden with regret. "I dismissed her fears as paranoia fueled by her investigation. I should have listened." As the detectives pursued this new light, a second letter materialized, bearing the same typewritten message tainted with blood. This time the confession ran deeper. She uncovered too much about the family, about the inheritance, about the old man's demise. "I never intended for things to escalate to that extent." The trail led them to the grand mansion of the deceased patriarch, where they confronted his eldest son, Richard. Among his collection of antiquities lay vintage typewriters, arousing suspicion. His explanations, rehearsed and polished, failed to mask the truth lurking beneath the surface. A breakthrough emerged when microscopic fibers on the envelopes linked back to custom stationery exclusively used by the family's youngest daughter, Alina. Questioned under the harsh glare of suspicion, Alina revealed Richard's request to borrow her stationery weeks prior. A search of Richard's abode unveiled a hidden chamber brimming with incriminating evidence, newspaper clippings, surveillance materials, and a vintage typewriter identical to the one employed in the ominous letters. The blood, upon analysis, proved to be Rebecca's, sealing the connection. However, the most startling revelation unfolded in the financial records that unveiled hefty transactions from Richard to Michael in the days leading up to Rebecca's untimely demise. Confronted with this damning evidence, Michael's facade crumbled. Rebecca had uncovered proof of Richard's treachery in hastening his father's demise for gain, he confessed in a broken whisper. I merely informed Richard of her discoveries, hoping to scare her off. I never envisioned he would silence her permanently. The final puzzle piece slid into place when a leaner stepped forward with a damning recording a clandestine conversation capturing Richard and Michael plotting Rebecca's demise. Richard's chilling words echoed in the courtroom. She must be silenced for good. In a desperate bid to flee, Richard was apprehended and justice began to unfold. The trial laid bare a tapestry of deceit woven by greed and betrayal. Richard staunchly professed his innocence, casting blame upon Michael as the mastermind behind the heinous deed. Yet the weight of evidence proved insurmountable. The jury's swift verdict, a resounding guilty, echoed through the hushed courtroom as justice claimed its due. Approaching Rebecca's grieving parents, Detective Morgan offered no solace save for the closure that justice had been served. The blood-stained letters, now relics of a sinister past, stood as a poignant reminder that even the most meticulously crafted crimes bore the indelible mark of guilt, a burden too heavy for the conscience to bear. The case of Rebecca Warren, once shrouded in shadows, emerged as a beacon of guidance for aspiring detectives, a testament to the power of intuition and unwavering determination. It taught a timeless lesson that behind every facade of perfection, a chink in the armor, no matter how small, could unravel even the most elaborate of schemes. And as the night wore on, the echoes of justice and redemption whispered softly, lulling the listener into a peaceful slumber. Story 27. In the hush of the night, a faint flicker danced across the baby monitor's screen, like a secret signal from the shadows. The mother, half asleep, brushed it off as mere interference, a glitch in the digital realm. But then the crackling static gave way to a soft, eerie voice that seemed to materialize from the darkness itself. "SHHH, go back to sleep," it whispered, a command laced with an otherworldly calmness that sent shivers down her spine. Her heart quickened as her maternal instincts screamed in warning. With trembling hands, she raced to her son's room, the air heavy with a sense of foreboding. But as she flung open the door, her worst fears were realized. The crib stood empty, a void where her precious Samuel should have been. Panic clawed at her chest as she scanned the room frantically, searching for any sign of intrusion. The window remained shut, the door securely locked, yet the only anomaly lay in the form of a discarded stuffed rabbit, its once innocent eyes now gleaming with a malevolent glint as if privy to some dark secret. In that moment, time seemed to stand still as a primal scream tore from her throat, a cry of anguish that reverberated through the quiet night. Neighbors stirred from their slumber by her wails, dialed emergency services, their voices strained with concern. When the authorities arrived, they found her cradling the ominous rabbit, a lone figure amidst the haunting stillness of the nursery floor. Samuel, her sweet 4-month-old, had vanished without a trace, leaving behind a void that threatened to consume her whole. The investigation that followed was a labyrinth of unanswered questions, a puzzle with missing pieces that refused to fit. No forced entry, no alarms triggered, just the enigma of a child taken from the heart of a supposedly secure home. Suspicion turned its accusing gaze towards Rebecca, her grief-stricken facade now a mask for whispered doubts and pointed fingers. But then a glimmer of hope pierced the darkness, a thread of evidence that led down a path of shadows and secrets. Tiny fibers, alien to the sanctuary of the nursery, clung to the windowsill like a silent witness to the night's betrayal. They whispered of a clandestine entry, a stealthy intruder who danced on the edge of sight. As the focus shifted, new revelations came to light, casting shadows on familiar faces. Daniel, the absent husband, returned to a storm of accusations and doubts. His hands bore the calluses of a hidden past, a past that unraveled in the harsh light of scrutiny. Rock climbing, a hobby turned alibi, now a damning link to a sinister truth. Financial records spoke of avarice, of a father's betrayal masked in the guise of love. A second family, a web of deceit that ensnared all who dared to trust. And in the depths of digital surveillance, a sinister plot unfurled a voice from the past, a woman scorned, a child caught in the crossfire. Elaine, the spectral figure in the shadows, emerged from the depths of obscurity, a phantom with haunted eyes and a fractured soul. In her arms, Samuel found sanctuary, a pawn in a game of twisted desires. The truth, a jagged shard of betrayal, cut through the fragile facade of innocence. As the trial unfolded, a tapestry of lies and deceit, the baby monitor stood as a silent sentinel, its truth veiled in whispers and static. The voice that beckoned in the night, a siren's call to oblivion, now a damning echo of treachery. And in the hushed courtroom, justice meted out its final verdict, a symphony of guilt and redemption played out in the harsh light of truth. Rebecca, scarred but unbowed, gathered the shattered remnants of her life, a phoenix rising from the ashes of despair. Samuel, innocent of the darkness that had threatened to consume him, found solace in a new dawn, a future untainted by the sins of the past. And as the echoes of the trial faded into memory, the baby monitor stood silent, a sentinel of truth in a world veiled in shadows.